Welcome everyone to tonight's
Hey guys.
Skeptic and Ranting. Do archaeologists think in absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? Oh my. Where tonight we are asking the question, if a claim lacks evidence, is that not evidence of something lacking? And we got 3 archaeologists with us to find out in Robert Caudill, Jonathan Quiery, and Pat Lowinger. I'm sending love to all 3 of you.
Good job.
Thank you. So come join James W. and myself, Amy Newman, as we have some fun worth digging for. Oh my.
Can you dig?
I want to thank you all on there for joining us on the interwebs. If you have recently got your vaccine or booster shot, now is the time to activate your 5G chip. Boop, boop, boop. I love it when it's.
How many bars do you have?
At least 4 or 5. Thank you, government lizards. Thank you. If you're feeling fancy, please don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe, and then hit that bell icon so you can get reminders to join our live streams. We will have an open mic Q&A section at the back half of the show. However, feel free at any time to send us your burning desire, thought bubbles, comments, and one-liners to be read on screen by tagging James or myself in chat at Amy Newman. Lastly, this housekeeping is sponsored by our Patreons, which help make this content even possible, including the awesome Triggers the Other Abrahamic Religions, KO Champ. Woo! Oh God, I'm not ready. Woohoo! Thank you so much, KO Champ. And also,
thank you.
The lovely Oz from the Atheist Round and Tang Gang Yo.
Thank you, Oz.
So, are you looking for better conversations? Are you looking for
they're here. They're not.
Believer community? You want to go. You want to go. Well, then head down to tart.live so you can go down to the better event. Hashtag Tang Gang. Woohoo! And also, as we level up in the skeptic community, and somehow this apparently is too complex to perform for natural reasons for some reason, Ian Davenport!
Ian!
Thank you so very much, Ian! No, really, it had to have been too complex. It's a watch or something like that. But also, sending love. I saw him out there in chat. When we look at creationist claims that make us say the world is 6,000 years old and we wonder how stars form or oil or really anything, we send a love and it makes us go to a grumpy old cuss.
Hey, Grumpy.
Sending love, Grumpy. No, really, it totally makes sense. Made out of clay, dirt, but we couldn't be made out of rock soup. That'd be way too silly. But also, 3 princesses in 1. Because technically speaking, when we do our skeptic Bible study, they don't really treat what's the word, women as humans. Sending love to Diana Smith.
Hey, Diana.
James, when you look into biblical morality, the debate is still out. But sending love.
You could go either way.
To our James, I would say that's the moral of my life. But anyway, sending love to our very own with us tonight, Pat Lowinger.
Pat. Thanks, Pat.
And also check out the historical and the theme, an archaeological look at the origins of Halloween, which we just took a peek back on. Talk Skeptic to me, so go check that out because it was a spooky good episode.
Ooh.
I'll leave now. Anyway, sending love, Pat. And also,
thanks, Pat.
As we gather kind of all of the skeptics together and we ask for, I don't know, a little bit of empirical evidence. It doesn't have to be a lot of empirical evidence, but a smidgen. We and Dale Pastel go, woo! Yeah, none. Sending love, Dale.
Dale.
But really, just a little bit, maybe just a little, maybe just a little.
Thank you, Dale.
No, that would be cheating. It has to be supernatural or paranormal or whatever other woo-woo name that they decide to make. Metaphysical. James, you just have to, all of you guys just need to understand the metaphysics of it. If you could understand the context of the metaphysics, that's how you'd really be grooving. It all makes sense. Take my word for it.
We got Biddy in the house. Hey, Biddy.
Hey, Biddy, what is up? So now I have to not only say Tangang Yo, but take a look out for the show that is going to be hosted by, once again, our very own Pat Lowinger and the awesome Biddy Buddha. Woohoo! Coming soon.
You won't want to be the guy to miss that show. Don't be that guy.
Don't be me. And also, hey, you know, James, this Earth, it's looking a little round. I hate to be the person.
It does look round.
I don't want to be biased in any direction or another. But I will say that, I don't know, maybe it's my fisheye eyes that are tricking me, but it looks round.
If you're biased, you might get sued by a flat earther for being biased.
That's true. And no, we're sending love once again. It doesn't matter what you believe in, though if you do think that it is, call us. But sending love to Dave Garr.
Dave Garr,
thank you, Dave Garr, and the head hyena of the pack. Because, you know, we kind of love other animals. Keyword other animals. Scott Duke! Woo-hoo!
Thank you, Scott.
Dun, dun, dun. Even if that sometimes triggers them. Are you putting me on the level of a monkey? Of an ape? Well, you are a... Ah! Well, okay, never mind.
Well, Amy thinks we all came from rocks, so, I mean.
That's true. Remember, folks, this is where the creationists think that non-believers think that we come from. We all come from rocks. So this is Grandpa. Hi, Grandpa.
Yeah.
It's always nice to get in touch with your ancestors. And da-da-da-da. Also, we have a Skeptic Bible study.
Do we?
Which
yes,
we are past episode 50 now, which is crazy. And we're only into numbers. Turns out the Bible's kind of long, but we're enjoying it so much. It's packed filled with, well, when it's not in exposition mode, it has action. It has lots and lots of stabbings and drownings and I don't know.
People die.
Putting bloods on altars and shit. So, you know, completely normal, natural stuff. Mm-hmm.
You have to spray the blood around the altar right, otherwise God will not approve of the sacrifice. He won't be pleased with it.
You know that you're the good guy when you're spreading the blood on the altar. That's how you know you're the good guy of the story. But thank you, Regos. And last, but certainly not least, we are sending love to Rachel Holland. Woo-hoo!
Thank you, Rachel.
And of course, it helps us remind ourselves that the Bible would never condone slavery, because that is something that we would figure out like 1,000 or something years later, and it would, I don't know, it'd be like pie on a deity's face. It would be too silly. Couldn't figure out something as simple as not owning other humans as property. But yes, thank you to all of our Patreons. You are who enable us to make such fun content by going to patreon.com/Amy Newman. However,
the gibberish that spews. Oh, wrong episode.
The gibberish that spews. Yeah. Do archaeologists think, in absence of evidence, is not evidence of absence? It is an important question to me to ask as a layperson, because many evangelical apologists will tell you that just because there's no evidence of a God or the seeming absence of said God, that doesn't count as their absence. Though shouldn't it? Sometimes when we're looking for something, the absence of each place we check is further evidence of that absence. However, the subject goes much further than theology. The more we search for ghosts, the less we find them. Does that mean ghosts aren't real? Well, no, but it is evidence towards that direction. So how do we find out one way or the other? Well, we have 3 archaeologists with us tonight to help us find out, do archaeologists think an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? And I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers. I can't believe you would say something so daring, yet so true. But I agree.
Thank you, Gizmo. Yeah, that is actually Gizmo chiming in.
Pat, or Patrick Pat Lowinger, is a historian, freelance writer, and educator. Patrick possesses an MA in ancient history from American Military University and an MA in archaeology from the University of Leicester, my uncle. In addition to teaching, Pat is currently conducting research in a pursuit of a PhD in ancient Mediterranean studies. Rob Caudill graduated from Arizona State University with a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and from Brandeis University with a master's degree in ancient Greek and Roman studies, both with an emphasis on archaeology. He is directly engaged in the archaeological world as a member of the staff at the excavation of the Roman Byzantine fort of, I'm going to go with Himalayas.
Himalayas. There you go.
There you go. Of the Dublin Delta in Romania. I could say Romania, I think. In the past,
let's give her a hand.
He has excavated, oh my, the Etruscan and Roman
We're just
sites.
Saying there's getting an echo.
Well, I'll just do it, Amy. Rob's excavated Etruscan sites. He's excavated on Minoan sites on Crete. He's excavated in Italy, and he is still excavating in Romania with the rest of us. And I'll just cover that because Rob's like awesome. Rob has
Certainly
approximately
sounds
a
awesome,
decade of
yeah.
excavation experience.
And tell me if that fixed the echo. I
think it's better.
turned
so.
off
Yeah.
I was looking at comments in chat, who knows? But send in love. And all right. What was the last line that you just said, or where were you just saying?
I just went quickly through Rob's. You can start with JQ now.
Okay,
Because
then
I was
I'm
getting
just
an echo
moving.
too, just so you know.
He finished it up off.
Oh my. Once again, that is basically the where the humor bar is at tonight. Mr. Jonathan Quiery, very proudly on this podcast, is a member of the Department of the Archaeological Durham University. His academic background includes an MA in Ancient Greek and Roman Studies from Brandeis. Hey, I think I've heard that before. University. A VA in History in Ancient Mediterranean Studies from the College of Worcester. His research topics include a cultural history of Roman military tropa in the provinces of Roman and barbarian identities, while his archaeological fieldwork includes archaeological excavations. Listen, people, this is a group effort, and I just want to thank the team at Imperial Fortification on the Limes Mosaic. That's right. The skeptic community is here together. Lastly, he has been in the archaeological excavations as a field recorder. That just reminded me of Jurassic Park for some reason. For sites like Coastal Town, looking into late Bronze Age, Crusader period, and Tel Kabare archaeological excavations. Can I not? Palace looking into the Middle Bronze Age. And with that, we are going to hand it over to Mr. Jonathan Quiery so he can start us off tonight. Do archaeologists think an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence?
I think Pat has some.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I think I was going to say I think Pat has some slides to show this evening to get us started.
All right.
I thought we could do that first, if you guys don't mind. Let me go ahead and pull those up, and I'll share.
Sure.
Gotta hit share. Oops.
I mean, while Pat does this, I mean, to speak to the prompt of tonight's talk, I think it's going to be very situational, depending on the specific site, historical context, and evidence that you're speaking about, and it's not going to be so black and white, and it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But yeah, let's see what Pat has to show us to begin with.
Well,
and if you ever have any comments, questions, or one-liners, keep on sending them in by tagging me in chat at Amy Newman, and we will read them on screen for you.
Did that show up, guys? No?
I'm not seeing a screen share yet.
Okay, let me try this again. Oh, this is what doing a live show is all about.
That's true. Well, while you're doing that, I can just send love into our chat. I'm seeing Mark, Titan Uranus, Bubblegum Gun, Natalie, Mark Reed, Exa Music, Nick, Tinkle Tink, High Inquisitor, Big Scream Bird, Don Willis, Farron Salas, woohoo, sending love, Materialist Dan. Oh, there we go. And all right. With that, we are going to start with our first archaeologist of the night. We are handing it over to you, Pat. The floor is all yours.
So when Amy and I first started talking about this, I just pulled some stuff out of one of my classes. When I teach an introductory class on archaeology, a question comes up because often students will ask this exact question because they've heard the phrase before. So, it's basically comes down to evaluating archaeological evidence. And from an archaeological standpoint, we're looking at typically, well, it's written about in some ancient book or some ancient text, like cities, towns, and events. How do we as archaeologists go out and evaluate that? And this is really a discussion of the intersection of text and what we refer to as material culture. And that's just basically the stuff we pull out of the ground as archaeologists and all the other data we're able to accumulate through excavation. I typically direct my students to a text to introduce them. And since I didn't change these slides for you guys, I'll just let you know if you're really interested in getting a very basic introduction. Archaeology in Text by John Moreland was published in 2001. It's still pretty good. If you want to go beyond that, there's several good books. Tilley wrote a book known as Material Culture and Text. Again, these are just books you can go to. They're well received in the archaeological community. But we have to ask ourselves, how reliable are ancient texts? Some are more reliable than others, and every text should be evaluated for that reason. We ask ourselves, how should archaeologists approach the literature of various ancient cultures? And it's necessary to at least have a basic understanding of epic prose, histories, plays, and other forms of genre of literature of various time periods, as going back as far as the creation of writing, which again, we're talking in Babylonia at a very, remote date. I typically give 3 stories, examples of what we'd expect. I call them the stories of Shemal. So if we find an ancient text like this cuneiform tablet here, which by the way isn't a story about Shemal, but or Shemel, it is descriptive of what we'd expect to see. If this is just a text describing this merchant building a house, we wouldn't really expect to find anything about that in the historical record within an archaeological context. How would you identify one regular guy's house from another? So we would just rely on the document being accurate because we don't expect to be able to ever actually verify it, given the nature of excavation and the ability to identify individuals in a plurality of ancient people. But if the text is talking about King Shemel, who built a temple in the city in which he ruled over, if it's a grand temple, we'd probably expect to see dedicatory inscriptions, other ancillary identifiers in other documents, other texts, but maybe hopefully we could identify the temple, but it's possibly wouldn't. There's, could have been torn down, repurposed, deconstructed, built over, destroyed in one layer. And again, it may not be possible. But if King Shemel in this text is describing his complete destruction of city B, which is the city away from city A, we'd expect to go to city B and be able to find evidence of that destruction. Now, if there's no destruction, we have to really start questioning this text as being accurate. Now, do we immediately discount it? No, but again, how reliable is the text if the events it's talking about don't actually have a trace within the archaeological record? And just for full disclosure, this is actually a early 20th or 19th century cuneiform tablet from southern Anatolia, which details a lawsuit. So in the text, in this particular text, this is like witness testimony and the argumentation that was given in this text about a lawsuit. And for that reason, we think it's reliable because it's a really mundane thing. It's not talking about great events. It's just about 2 people having a land dispute. And I'm sure Dr. Josh, who was in the chat earlier, can read it for us, but I won't put him on the spot. And if you want to see it, you can look at this. It's currently in the Met's collection. So you guys have any thoughts about that before we continue? Because I can't actually see you.
Are you talking to Rob and I?
Yeah, anyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, right off the bat, one of a few important points to bring up, particularly as you move on through some of your other slides, is when we're talking about historical texts and then how modern archaeologists and archaeologists in the past have used text to sort of interpret the historical past. It's critical to remember or analyze why were these texts written and who were these texts written for, and approach that with a layer of caution when you're examining the past, because by that very nature, they're going to present some biases. And then how do those biases, or how does that truth then translate into the archaeological record? Because even in the archaeological record, truths and biases can be reinforced from text into material culture.
Right. Rob, you got anything? That's gonna be the topic of tonight, I think.
No, I think the one thing I would say is identification too, right? If we have securely identified city B, right? Because that happens, that things aren't always correctly identified. So there can be an error in that regard as well when trying to
right.
Yeah. So I guess to expand upon that point with yes, this is going to be things that we're going to be talking about throughout the night. But just for clarification, when we're talking about ancient texts, and I mean this obviously isn't wholesale. Ancient texts cover a wide variety of topics, and like the example you've just shown here, Pat, is a land dispute or a lawsuit. Discussing a disagreement with land, that would be one thing very difficult to identify in the archaeological record without the literary evidence, just period. But we have to think about the socioeconomic hierarchy of these ancient settlements, and remember that a lot of the ancient text is being written by and for people higher up on that socioeconomic ladder, whether it be kings, whether it be emperors, whether it be the aristocracy, whether it be wealthy individuals versus lower class people, farmers, peasants, slaves, what have you. So right there, you already have a discrepancy in how archaeologists are going to be able to understand the literary evidence, or at least a vast amount of the literary evidence when we are examining material in the ground.
Right. I fully agree. When we talk about the text, typically we use the term social elite. You'll see that a lot in literature. Amy, James, do you have any questions for us before we continue?
I don't. I think it's very fascinating, but I'm ready to go to the next one. What do you think, Amy?
I think so.
Okay. So again, these are just what I use for my class. So how do we, as archaeologists, evaluate the absence of evidence? And again, I asked my students, have you ever heard this phrase? An absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Well, in some cases, that's true. In other cases, it can be indicative of absence, right? So each time we look at this, we have to look at, particularly when we're analyzing textual evidence, right? So textual descriptions give us expectations, and then we have to, based on those expectations, we have to analyze and evaluate what we see within an archaeological context, and typically that's done through excavation. And I try to tell my students it's all about size. If something like this land dispute is relatively minor, I don't think we'd expect to see any part of it within an archaeological context. But is it possibly would? Sure, we might see in a Greek and Roman context the changes of barriers between one piece of property of another, maybe with a stone fence or the movement of demarcation lines and boundaries. But that's really hard to detect, and I would actually say it might be impossible to detect in many contexts. Like something of a moderate size, again, we go back to King Shemel and the building of a temple in his city. That's moderate. You'd expect a building, particularly depending how it's described in the text, would leave some type of record. Now, it's possible it won't, but we would look for it, and we'd try to find inscriptions. But that building might be there, but we just can't identify it within an archaeological record with direct evidence that's actually the temple that the king actually built, because we may not have direct evidence to associate it with that particular ruler. And again, that would be a moderate level of evidence and corroboration. And then what about extensive expectation of evidence? Again, an entire city being destroyed, a massive movement, a migration of people, an invasion of another country, a massive movement, a migration of people, an invasion of another country.
Hold on. There you
go. That kind of, we'd expect to see something detectable in the archaeological record within the time frame that we would look at it. And that's not necessarily right always easy either. But this is it. The larger that the text is saying an event is, the more likely we'd expect to see its presence within an archaeological record. And I like to use the example of crime scenes, right? So if someone were to tell you, just imagine you're a police officer, and someone were to tell you, hey, someone broke into my house. And you're like, well, how do you know they broke in their house? When I came home, the back door was open. Is it possible you left the back door open? Well, no, I always lock it, but you find no evidence in the house. Well, you can't really say it happened or didn't happen because you don't have any evidence. So again, in that case, you can't tell. And that phrase would hold up. But if the person told you, hey, my house was broken into, and you go in and the back door was kicked in and their TV's missing, then you can say, yes, that their statement, which was what we're going to say is the text, the written account is, matches up to the evidence that we see. And that would be confirmation. But if that same person were to tell you, hey, there was a mass murder just committed in my house, and you go inside, there's no blood, there's no bodies, there's no fiber, there's no trace evidence, you might want to think this person may be thinking conspiracy theories. They may not be in their sound mind. But the reality is there's a certain levels of expectation of evidence. Now, is it possible that there's some massive conspiracy to change this crime scene? You know, we've all seen movies where this is the plot, but we really don't expect that, you know. And Amy wants me to put in there, yeah, sure, it could be aliens, but it's not aliens, right? So that's
saying aliens, but aliens.
Aliens, right?
And we also have a question before you.
Sure.
Oh no, when you get to the end of that point, or
right? No, I can
actually I interrupted you, so I'm going now. How sure are we about the interpretation of cuneiform? I'm just wondering, since we are working backwards, and that's from High Inquisitor. Thank you so very much.
Well, again, cuneiform is not my area of expertise. I do know that those that deal with cuneiform text, Assyriology, like Dr. Josh at Digital Hammurabi, who was in the audience a little earlier, we're pretty sure we've unlocked what we'd consider the corpus of the language. Now, I'm sure there's some areas of nuance that are still debated among Assyriologists and others that work in cuneiform, but I know that's not my area of expertise. I know that's not Rob's or JQ's, but the Assyriologists themselves seem pretty confident they're able to competently translate these texts from a variety of sources, given the preservation and transmission of that into other languages in contemporaneous times in the mid and later, the classical and Hellenistic period. So I think we are pretty confident in the general field, and Assyriologists and someone specialized would be better able to answer some of the more nuanced questions on how far and how reliable the translations are. Mm-hmm. That's my Dr. Josh.
Thank you so very much. Ooh, and well, you said his name twice. I would say almost a third time. I'm just going to count it right now.
Okay, do
Dr.
it, Amy.
Josh.
Do it.
And that means that, hey, are you looking to have a book as a compare guide to our Skeptic Bible study? Well, hey, there is a Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1, out sale now. But yes, to go back to your point, something that it may be just something that I always tie it back to religion. But when I'm talking a lot about miracle claims, I am always looking for some sort of either massive amount of evidence or some like straightforward evidence. And I often look at the relatively, let's say, small amounts of evidence. In fact, when we're almost talking of absence of evidence, it makes me think of the whole coming back from the dead and then the body just disappearing trick. And so I would, I guess, I would like more evidence in the face of some of those claims, because it actually looks like the opposite for something so massive.
So massive. I love when Amy says so massive.
I love so massive.
Which brings us to another point real quick.
We got echo again. We got echo again, Amy.
Oh, okay. Does someone have a browser open?
See, all my browsers are closed, and I am using a headset.
As
Okay.
am I.
Is it?
I think it's okay right now.
Okay.
Oh,
One thing that I
just keep going. We may have to. Biddy was saying there was some echo again.
Okay. One of the things we need to look at too is I'm often asked, oh, what's this argument from silence? Well, it seems like it would sound like an absence of evidence, but it's kind of like the reverse in a way. An argument from silence is really, in historians and archaeologists, more historians will say, well, if something's not mentioned in a text, we assume it didn't happen. Well, because if it was really such a noteworthy event, if something was noteworthy, then someone would note it down. Well, that argument is used in history sometimes to say, well, it's unlikely an event happened to the scale, otherwise someone would mention it. An example of that is, the account of, in the New Testament of the slaying of the firstborn, right? We would expect to see that in the record, and we'd also of the Roman record or contemporaneous Hellenistic records around that region, Greek and then Syrian and Aramaic and even Hebrew, but we don't. So that would be an argument saying, well, since it's a critical event, it should have been in the record. Well, and that can be used in some cases, but that means it's missing from other textual sources, or it's only mentioned in one source with no other confirmation, which is different than when archaeologists look at it, an absence of evidence. Basically, someone says it should be there. We're actually looking at the physical evidence in the ground versus textual silence, which is a different issue. So they're related, but they're different enough to important to keep them separate. And I try to keep my students on track. So if you hear someone say, well, that's an argument from silence, just remember that's different than an argument about an absence of evidence, right? So just keep that straight in your mind and know they're not the same thing. And why might there be relatively little evidence for an event described as being massive? And I typically ask my students that question, and they explain, well, maybe, maybe the battlefield, if it was a battle, was cleaned up. And that makes sense because that was very common to collect, weapons and armors of defeated foes, and bodies may have been disposed of in a manner that makes them harder to detect than if they were placed into a mass grave. But that's why archaeology tries to keep an open mind for the interpretation and discovery of evidence. We try to keep a wide target rather than a narrow target, so that we can situationally evaluate evidence at multiple levels and with multiple lenses, so that we can try to get the best interpretation. And that picture, just because I have to promote it, is from the site where Jonathan and Rob and I excavate in Romania. That's from the 2019 season. And I just I used this photo for class because I was trying to show my students that archaeology isn't sometimes as glamorous as people think it is. It's a lot of moving dirt, and there's a lot of stone, and you got to do a job, and you got to know what you're doing, and you got to work methodologically and try to keep everything going. My last picture is just, I asked my students, what do you see? We know at Halmiris that the fort was attacked and several times was burnt and was damaged. And I asked my students taking an introductory class, what do they see here? This photo is purposely somewhat obscure with none of the cool labels that I typically put on stuff. But down here towards the bottom, where that dark line is, that bottom set of coarsework stone, you see what could be it is an archway. And you see in the middle of that archway a burn layer, dark deposit, which is probably part originally of a beam that was used to support the ceiling of the structure. So these are the kind of things you'd expect to see if your fort burned down, which in our case it did. And so this is positionally where we'd expect it to be, given the stratigraphy of the site. And although it's awesome, it wasn't surprising. Although the feature right there is surprising, because we didn't think there would be this particular feature, this arch feature, where it was, given the other context of the fort's construction. So again, sometimes you find what you want, at the same time you're finding something you expect, at the same time you're finding something you don't expect. And that's why I thought this picture was kind of illustrative. And that's all I have, because again, this is a very brief part of my of what I do in class. So they don't get a whole lot on this issue, but I figure it's worth bringing up here to talk about. So I'm done.
Well, thank you, Pat. That was an interesting presentation.
Woo-hoo. Yeah, and I wanted to give either Robert or Jonathan a chance to make either any comments on anything we saw, and then if you wanted to segue into your presentation or anything you wanted to talk about on do archaeologists think an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence?
Well, I mean, just listening to you speak, Pat, and particularly speak about Halmyrus, I can't help but think about ancient itinerary routes, and this might be one area where you have the full spectrum of literary evidence of written itinerary routes, marking places from one to another with distances which historians and archaeologists use quite regularly, or have used quite regularly in the past, to try and identify not only place names, but try and find physical sites on the ground. And we see a wide range of outcomes from this. So taking Romania as an example, and even taking Halmyrus specifically as a site as an example, but we have a colleague at Halmyrus who has looked more in depth at this. So to provide two examples, according to ancient itinerary routes, there should be a site called Ad Stoma somewhere in what is present-day Romania, which would have been along the Limes Moesia, or at least somewhere south of the Limes Moesia, connected to it in some manner. And despite what the literary sources say, it has been unconfirmed in the archaeological record thus far. And so this is an example where there's a huge discrepancy in the historical record versus the archaeological record versus the historical and literary record, because for sites as large as Romano-Byzantine forts that often have a civilian settlement attached to it, those are fairly identifiable within an archaeological record. It's not like looking for a specific artifact, for example. So to have a site and specifically distances of other sites that we as archaeologists have confirmed in the archaeological record, to not have that jive, to use a lack of a better word, is quite puzzling, because it is just entirely missing thus far. And then to use Halmyrus, which is the site that all three of us have worked at collectively, we have, and other archaeologists have for the past several decades, referred to the site by the name Halmyrus. It also goes by Thalmonium in later antiquity. And we're using this name based off of ancient itineraries and ancient literary sources. But that being said, unlike many other Romano-Byzantine forts along the Limes Moesia and elsewhere within the Roman Empire, we have never been able to ground truth this name within the archaeological record. So we believe it to have been Halmyrus. We believe it to be Halmyrus. And we can say with a high degree of certainty that it likely is Halmyrus, but until something in the archaeological record actually verifies it as such, whether it be an epigraphic inscription that mentions Halmyrus, whether it be some sort of epigraphic inscription and or graffito that has the mention of specific military units that we know were stationed at that site, it still remains fairly ambiguous, and archaeologists would not be able to say with 100% certainty that this site is Halmyrus. And this can apply for sites across, not only the Roman Empire, but empires generally, history more generally. But, that is just two examples from a very, very localized region within Europe. And, these sorts of issues expand much more broadly.
Right. And again, we'll talk about Halmyrus. In 2002 2002 to 2004, Dr. Mihail Zahariadeh, who we've all worked with, had found some text talking about the entombment and the execution and martyrdom of 2 saints, and began using that text to look for, because they had been placed in a dedicatory tomb somewhere at Halmiris. But it didn't say really where it was in Halmiris, just that there had been this church built in commemoration on top of this tomb. Well, in 2002, he found a basilica, that church building where he identified it. And eventually by 2004, he found the 2 saints actually entombed inside. And what made it even better for confirmation was, in Greek, their names were written over were in the tomb itself, identifying who they were inside their tomb, which made it really nice. But again, we've never actually had any inscription like Jonathan's saying that says you're at Halmiris. We know the saints were buried at Halmiris in a literary record.
City limits,
right? Or again, this is the issue. It's kind of it's incremental evidence. I'm highly confident. Jonathan's highly confident. Rob's highly confident. Everybody who works the site's highly confident. But until we get that one magical inscription that says you're at Halmiris,
it's not,
or something.
It's highly probable, but not absolute certain.
Right.
Because you're building a picture of history, basically, right? You're trying to find as much factual evidence as you can to try and put together the most accurate view of the way it used to be. But then I guess you're also, because of, I guess, even the further back you would go, I would assume, the harder back it is.
Right. And texts have been used for good and bad. Like, again, my buddy Henry Schliemann, I'm kind of making jokes, famous archaeologist who wanted to use the Iliad to prove the existence of Troy. He's famous, but he's also a villain because he used dynamite in archaeology. Bad guy. He destroyed more stuff than he may have preserved in some cases. But at the time, he was using the methods that were they were aggressive, but it was a different time in archaeology. Preservation wasn't the issue. It was discovery was the issue. And getting to what layer or what context, I did layer for Dr. Josh, what context, what level of occupation in this ancient site. Now, Schliemann was ultimately able to identify Troy. He identified the wrong layer. He wasn't where he thought he was, but he was right that the site actually existed, that Troy wasn't a myth. Now, that was like the broadest example. He was right, but that doesn't mean that it didn't help him with his archaeology at all. It actually helped him misinterpret the site. He actually made numerous mistakes, destroyed a huge amount of evidence, and it destroyed quite a bit of archaeological record that was never analyzed. And that's why he's considered a villain by many archaeologists today. But that's one site where, ultimately, in a very broad sense, the archaeological record was reflected in an ancient text, right? Or at least the mentioning of the site. Troy was real. People thought Troy was entirely mythical, but Schliemann goes, no, I think it's real based on a cultural memory, that it really happened. And much later, someone wrote it down, and ultimately he was right.
There's a lot to unpack from that example, which you do a nice job of touching upon, about the fact that, as most people know the story of the Trojan War, which obviously makes the site so famous, but the identification of the site and working backwards through its multiple writings and rewritings throughout history that originally come from an oral tradition, and being able to connect all those dots from the event itself or from the place itself, through all the periods of history and then into, let's call it, contemporary or modern archaeology. I'm referring to Schliemann here, but within the past, little over a century or so, his ability to use what really is something that stems from an ancient oral history to ground truth what is one of the most famous and well-known sites from antiquity is pretty remarkable. But then, I mean, to unpack that even further as archaeologists and as we try to understand and verify information within the archaeological record based off of what ancient literary sources are telling us, it is not an uncommon practice for modern archaeologists to also reinforce ancient and present biases within their own understanding of the archaeological record.
Right.
And I mean, that's a completely different topic of conversation, but when we talk about the biases of ancient literary sources, and then potentially not matching what we find in the archaeological record, it does have some connection to what we as archaeologists are then doing with the materials that we're finding.
Right. And I mean, Rob, for example, has dug at Etruscan sites, right? And the only really records we have about the Etruscans come from the Romans, right? So how, you have anything to add, Rob?
Well, kind of piggybacking off of what you said about like the scale of events, right? I think one thing that's important to consider with this is the scale of investigation, right? So if, I excavate, a 1 by 1 meter trench, right? And I don't find anything, I mean, that doesn't mean anything, right? It's such a small, square. Like you can conceivably come down in the middle of something and not really find anything. But, you expand that to something larger, you do multiple excavations, right? And the probability of missing something becomes, smaller, right? So it's kind of a microcosm in that, I've used that phrase, right? And you kind of use it and it's almost like kind of a way to, comfort ambiguity, right? If you've got, volunteers and things like that, right? And you come down and you don't find anything, right? Well, that doesn't mean, we're in the wrong place generally, or there isn't anything to find. It's just, sometimes it's just kind of luck, right? You don't come down on anything. So, I mean, I think that's an important thing to consider in all this too, is that, if the scale's small, then, that's kind of a viable, phrase to use, right? But as you expand, it becomes less useful to use something like that, right?
At some point, if it's big enough scale, you would expect to find something if it's there. And then maybe not absolutely certain, but it seems highly probable it would be there if you looked enough,
Right. And, one thing that's important too is like sites, and we'll just talk about cities, towns, and villages, right? In the ancient world, they weren't static. Some cities were occupied their entire existence from the Bronze Age to today. And so you have layer upon layer upon layer. People didn't throw shit away. People didn't like today, they come and they knock down a house, take everything away, and then take it off to a dump miles and miles away using heavy equipment, moving trucks. They typically knock stuff down where it was at and rebuilt right on top of it. Use the rubble from the last structure to build the floor and foundation of the structure they were working on then. Now, in some cases, they did move stuff away, but that's the exception, not the rule, right? So you still keep a mind open for that. But you have occupation layers. That's typically what we talk about, is we date sites based on how compacted the next site is on top of the site before it. And in some cases, we have abandonment and then reuse. At Halmyrus, that happens. The fort's at one point destroyed, and the Byzantines, the guys in charge of it, they just leave and they're not coming back. But then local people move into the fort and they start building like ramshackle, dwellings, using some of the adjacent architecture to support them making a home in the late antique period after the fortress itself wasn't used in a military context at all. It was abandoned by the military, and then civilians took it over and didn't really have the the skill or expertise to repair it back to what it was. They just kind of throw stuff together here or there, and they live inside it kind of in a makeshift fashion. And we find that
why
too.
build a whole new house when they're like, hey, we could move in right here?
We have three
like
really
they
good
take those
walls. All we have
missile
to do is
silos
make
today
a little wall.
and
Right.
make them into
Well,
homes, you know.
There's something to be said. I want to kind of like springboard off of what Rob was saying earlier, and kind of like extrapolate that onto, again, contemporary archaeology within the past a little over a century or so, because archaeology as a discipline, at least an academic and scientific discipline, is, you know, fairly new. I mean, as far as systematic excavations and our understanding of it are concerned. And, you know, and Rob was saying that you can dig down, and Pat, Rob, and I have all had this experience with volunteers on site. Sometimes you dig down and you don't find anything. And I'm going to put that in scare codes. You don't find anything. And sometimes you truly don't find anything. Sometimes you find the big mammoth rock walls that you're hoping to find and whatnot. But as the field of archaeology has become more nuanced and more scientific and more specific, our understanding of previous archaeology done 50, 100, and 120 years ago has also changed. So, you know, past archaeologists may have said there's no evidence here, based off of what literary sources may have been saying, but the truth may be that there's no real stone walls, or there's no permanent non-organic materials here, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't anything there. It just means that previous archaeologists, or we as archaeologists, are still missing something within the archaeological record because we weren't looking for it, or we weren't careful enough with our analyses of the site itself. And again, when you reflect this back upon whatever historical time period you're looking at, this is going to be a reflection upon the socioeconomic system of whatever site you're looking at. You know, when you come down upon what most people envision as archaeology, with the big columns or the big walls all made of marble or rock or something like that, this is once again playing into the wealth of an empire, the wealth of an individual, which does not necessarily reflect upon the society as a whole. This is one tiny little aspect of a much wider system.
And can I just ask, what is something like a big find look like? What is something that is like kind of an aha, or is it more like maybe very smaller ahas that build a bigger picture? Or does that even make sense?
It does make sense. And so I again, reflecting upon the history of archaeology as a discipline, I think, you know, previously there's been, you know, earlier on in the discipline, there's been a much more of a focus for the bigger ahas. People wanted to find the magnificent, the monumental, the shiny, you know, the things that are really going to wow people. And only as the discipline has moved into more of a scientific field and into a more nuanced field, have we been able to look at the smaller evidence, and from the smaller evidence collectively been able to build a much bigger picture.
Makes
so
sense.
For example, let's just say I'm going to be making up some of the information here just for the sake of an example. But for example, let's look at something like the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Greece, at Olympia. It is a mammoth complex excavated 100 years ago-ish. You know, I don't remember the exact date that it was excavated, but it wasn't excavated recently. But it's a mammoth structure that has a large archaeological footprint. So it's mentioned in the literary sources, it's ground truth on the ground. But when you start to maybe look at the more minute information that you might be able to obtain from much more detailed analyses, you might be able to understand the way that the people lived at the site, around the site. And it's not just here's a temple, it's here's the temple, and here's the way people might have operated within this place, might have lived within this space, et cetera, et cetera. So you can understand almost the experience of people much more, rather than here's a nice, pretty ancient Greek temple, full stop.
People wanted
trying to really understand
discoveries, but yeah, the grand, like here's an entire tomb of a pharaoh and things like that, versus the more, the more subtleties that you get when it became a science, where you're trying to not just make headlines, you're trying to actually construct a field of study.
Exactly, and they all do go hand in hand. I'm not trying to belittle the big and impressive. Those are obviously important, but there's a much wider picture to be understood.
It sounds like you're trying to almost build their perspectives from back then. You're trying to not only say maybe why is it's just easy to say this is there, but then trying to say why is this there and why did the people build it in the first place is probably, you have to really get into their heads, which is something you can only do by gathering a lot of evidence, building the full picture.
And it
sound like
things.
And some of that does, a good amount of that does come from the literary record, and then that's what we as archaeologists try and do is ground truth the information that we receive from literary records. I think a lot of times when people think about historical time periods, they often think about it in the abstract. They don't actually try and think about the human experience of what it might have been like to live in a specific place at a specific time.
And sometimes the literary record, has been established for a long time. And Rob has an interesting kind of recent development at Pompeii, what we discussed earlier today. Rob, you want to talk a little about that? Just how sometimes archaeology challenges texts in ways that isn't necessarily as stellar and awesome as it sometimes is in other places.
Oh yeah, the date of eruption, right? We thought for a long time that the date of eruption of Pompeii was in August, but now they found evidence at Pompeii, and it's mostly in the form of food stuff. There's also a graffito that noted a date, but it was written in charcoal, so it's something that wouldn't have survived very long between when it was written and when it was covered up, and it mentions a date that's later than that, they think. So now
how later?
Just a couple months, really.
Okay.
They think it maybe happened like in October, November, rather than August, and part of that is based
August
on that
because that was the last date that they found, or was that why?
Traditionally the date that the literary sources have suggested, right? But then food, they found food that wouldn't have been available at that time, fruits that wouldn't have been available at that time of year at Pompeii, which suggests that maybe it was later than they had initially thought, right?
Oh, fascinating.
The literary record says.
Yeah, that's a great example.
It's not conclusive, but it makes us think about it, right? Like, is it possible the date's wrong? Now, I don't think anybody's willing to say absolutely the date's wrong, but it makes us think. And given the people that really study the events around the eruption of Vesuvius, they realized there was a lot of significant seismic activity that preceded it. Earthquakes that were, devastating the region. So, it's possible that, people that were later making these accounts may have been talking about one of the big earthquakes rather than the actual eruption, and using dates and conflating it because maybe they weren't firsthand witnesses to it. It's possible. These are just conjectures based on the fact we're finding evidence of, like Rob said, foodstuffs that wouldn't have been available at the time. Fruiting bodies of certain products just wouldn't be there, but they find it would have been available a few months later. It makes us ask questions, but it's not conclusive in any way at this point.
Can I ask an opinion question about? I think a lot of people, just like myself, we find Pompeii interesting because of it's just such a tragedy. And so my question is there any evidence of the time that anyone knew anything of it? Like were there science advisors or anyone saying get out of here? Were there people doing warnings, or was it something that was just so random that Pompeii just disappeared and then there are records about it afterwards? Does that make sense? Was there any warnings or anything like that? Or was it just as much as a surprise, and it's only because we have hindsight that we can go?
I'm gonna pass that one off to Rob. I'm gonna let him continue on with this one.
Well, yeah, there was a very large earthquake in 62 CE. So, what was that? 17 years before, and they had significant seismic activity. And there are things that suggest that they knew, right? Like the agriculture in the area was very good, and they knew there was a connection between that and volcanic soil, right? So between the earthquakes, it suggested that something was going on, right? But whether they knew exactly, we still can't pinpoint that sort of thing, right? You can have a, major seismic event that would precede something like that, but it can, like in this case, it's 17 years and there were probably, minor earthquakes in between. And that's kind of a long time, right? That's almost a generation,
sure,
right, for that to happen. And it's one of those things that it probably, well, yeah, we had that earthquake a long time ago, but things are okay now, right? And we can kind of say the same thing.
They weren't connecting the dots, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, they knew it was a seismically active area. There was the Phlegraean fields near Naples, right, which is a volcanic, active area. So, I mean, they probably knew something was going on, but whether, even with all the technology we have now, we can't really predict that.
It's still hard to pinpoint that. I think the joke is, and we still have a hard time predicting the weather.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Natalie put in the chat that they can find some seismic evidence of the volcano prior to the eruption.
There is geological evidence for. Yes, there's geological evidence around Mount Vesuvius, around, for the eruption and thereafter. But I mean, the point to which we're speaking as far as the specific date can't be pinpointed to a specific day. And the matter of, a month or 2 months or 3 months is an interesting question for historians and archaeologists to try and unpack. And really, I mean, anyone, geologists, archaeologists, or historians wouldn't be able to put a specific day on it. There's to once again piggyback off of what Rob was saying, and to kind of expand upon the question that Amy raised, is the literary evidence that we have for the eruption of Mount Vesuvius comes from Pliny the Younger, mainly Pliny the Younger in his letters to the Emperor Trajan, that he writes, what is that, maybe 15 years, 20 years after the eruption itself takes place. So he was on the north end of the Bay of Naples during the eruption. So he witnessed the eruption firsthand and wrote from his firsthand experience of it. So that's where a bulk of our, at least literary understandings of the eruption comes from. And then once again, we've tried to fill in the gaps within the archaeological record. I think, I don't know, it's an interesting, because you're talking a little bit about like, oh well, didn't the people of Pompeii know
Let me put an asterisk on that. I'm not trying to say like, oh, you silly people back then.
No.
I definitely, even now, probably would have died from something like that.
Oh,
but,
and people still do. You know, the eruption of Mount Krakatoa, the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and it goes back to, you know, there might have been, there's a modern understanding of how these geological processes work. There's an ancient understanding of how these geological processes work that is vastly different from how we understand them. And I think it's an interesting comparative piece to sort of discuss the fact that, you know, as archaeologists, we've uncovered the remains of many people who died at Pompeii and at other sites around Mount Vesuvius. But then looking at the eruption of Thera, and Rob or Pat, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's been since, I'm not a Bronze Age archaeologist, and it's been since Brandeis since I have studied this. But the eruption of Thera, which is a Bronze Age eruption, and like Pompeii, it has preserved the remains of a Bronze Age settlement on what is now modern day Santorini. But the biggest difference between these two ancient eruptions that have, fortunately for archaeologists, preserved two sites from two different periods is the Theron excavations have not uncovered any human remains. So we're talking about an eruption 1,500 years prior to that of Pompeii. Yet when you compare the two, it does appear that the ancient Minoans, or the ancient people of Thera, understood the geological processes at hand and were able to make preparations in order to,
in a colloquial term, they got the fuck out. They got the fuck out.
Yes. Or it's going to be like a Herculaneum situation where eventually they're just going to uncover one building and there's just going to be a ton of people there.
Right.
But as of now, and to the best of my knowledge, that has not been the case.
Right. And that is one of the things about even Herculaneum. People originally, they thought, well, maybe the people escaped, got out in time, but then later down by what we know as we now call the boat houses, right? The area down by what would have been the water in ancient Herculaneum, you just find bodies upon bodies upon bodies upon bodies because people ran down to the water to try to get away. So the bodies make sense where they're at, but it's not like other, you know, what you expect to see. There weren't bodies scattered all over Herculaneum. There were a few, but they weren't that many. Most of them were all in one area, which was confirmed by archaeology for many years. It looked like, did people escape? Nope. But until we found them, it looked like they might have escaped, or they were trying.
That goes to the point that it might have looked like it, but the evidence just hadn't been uncovered yet.
Right.
So I mean, this is an excellent example that Pat and Rob raised, and to like bring it back to the prompt as far as like, you know, what do literary sources tell us against what we find in the archaeological record. I mean, this is probably one of the most famous events from the Roman period, and we have fairly detailed descriptions from Pliny the Younger, which have been able to be verified in much more detail as archaeologists have excavated not only Pompeii but Herculaneum and all the smaller sites around the Bay of Naples over the past 100 plus years. Some of the points being true, some of the points, maybe not mentioned by Pliny because he was so far removed from the actual sites that were being affected. So it's an interesting comparison, the way that, Pliny's accounts then, match up or don't match up with the actual archaeological evidence.
And I don't
know about anybody else. I mean, if people want to ask questions.
I was going to say, I think we are going to be sliding into the open mic in a second or two, but I do want to send a special thank you to Pat, Jonathan, and Rob for being our special guest hosts
thanks,
tonight
guys.
and being so awesome as we have taken an archaeological look at is absence of evidence not evidence of absence. So feel free to keep tagging James W. and myself in chat at Amy Newman. And in a second, look into the link in chat so that you can join our StreamYard, and we'll go for another 30-40 minutes of some fun. But send in hearts to all you guys, and any final thoughts before we go into the open mic?
Well, I'm just going to say, while you're transferring to the open mic, I'm going to take a quick 1-minute break for you know what.
That sounds good. And go worship Satan.
Thank you to both of you for hosting the event this evening. It's been really fun to kind of talk about this stuff. I know we were kind of we touch upon a bunch of different things. But this was fun.
The concept is interesting.
I thought it was a lot of good information.
Is there anything like is there like a quintessential example of something that maybe the literary sources had assumed for a long time, and that the archaeological evidence just completely upended, that was, kind of groundbreaking or shocking to the field?
That's a good question. I'm going to try and rack my brain here.
Maybe to focus at anything surprising. I'm trying to think how to rephrase.
Like something completely like we look, we're expected to find this, and we find something completely different, or.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. That's not to say that examples don't exist, for sure. Not on the scale of like a city. In my experience and in my understanding, it's much more focused than that.
Can we take it in a different direction? What was your most interesting finding so far?
Just generally, like without like.
Well, what was one that got you excited? Yeah, you're right. Maybe it's too general. Let's see if I can.
No, I mean, so that's a common question that I think, Rob, you've probably gotten that, a bunch of times too.
It's like when I get asked, they're like, "Oh, you do comedy? Be funny." You're
sure,
like,
that's exactly.
This is Wendy's, man, but thank you.
In my archaeological experience, I think probably one of the most interesting finds that I have discovered was a Iron Age seal stone that had the image of a griffin on it. So seal stones, by their nature, would have been used by people in the upper socioeconomic parts of society, whether they be aristocrats, whether they be priests, things like that. So to come, it was like still like beautifully intact, and it had, I believe it was Akkadian on the back of it. That was something that came out of an excavation that I was on in Israel. So
you're saying that's not evidence of House Gryffindor, though? That's not how that works? That was such... It was such a good question that it ejected him from the interwebs. But we are sending hearts to Jonathan. Yeah. The joke normally on this podcast is every once in a while we get summoned by Satan. We do sell timeshares, and he just pulls us down there.
Informal meeting.
Informal meeting. But we'll get on. It's like the face is perfect. That's for.
Thank you.
But as Pat is taking care of business and we are summoning Jonathan from Ether, Rob, do you have any thoughts before we go into the open mic?
Any thoughts? Just generally, or about that? About
any extra
Anything,
thoughts
yeah.
on the subject, either on your various study or well, I feel bad now. I think I was told someone interviewing an interview person, they're like, you want to know a good question, you don't make it too general, because when you do it too general, then people's brains just go all over. So how about he is. We have summoned him back.
Yes, I'm
the
sorry.
interwebs.
I'm not sure what happened.
Woo-hoo.
It's the mountains of
We blame the devil.
devil.
Or Satan, if you worship Satan. Satin, 50% softer, so always a good choice. But yeah, I forget. I remember it was such an awesome question that it ejected from the interwebs, but now I forget what it was. But we're about to go into the open mic. So before we I see Natalie and a very stable dog with us in to have some fun. Is there any final thoughts before we move in?
No.
I think we've squeezed the orange juice. We have had I've enjoyed this a lot. I want to thank you guys so much because, like I was telling Pat on our Talk Skeptic to Me, it's always nice to have two schmucks ranting, which is what James and I do. But then every once in a while, you kind of want to have people with experience and expertise.
People actually know.
People actually, know what they're talking about. Come on to the show. So we want to thank Pat, Rob, and Jonathan one more time as we switch into our Skeptic and Ranting open mic. Woohoo! What is up, Natalie?
Hi.
I thank you for joining us as
Welcome
we
aboard.
do a little ranting on Do Archaeologists Thinking Absence of Evidence is Not Evidence of Absence. I hope you are doing well. And what are your thoughts about anything you heard tonight or the subject itself?
Oh, well,
What
I
questions?
have lots of thoughts about this, but I just wanted to pop in here because I realized you used one of my comments. It wasn't quite out of order or out of context, but I had explained right before it that geologically we can see a broad picture, but archaeologists are able to find finite details that we aren't able to calculate via soil samples and rock samples. So, and then you popped in, it's like, yeah, but geologists can see this. And I was like, oh no. But hi, Pat. Hi, guys.
This is Natalie. She's a geologist.
I'm a geoarchaeologist.
She's a geologist.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Are you telling us that we now have 4 archaeologists on
I don't
camera?
have any masters, though.
Gentlemen.
I am undergrad. I'm backing out. I have a lot of years of experience in the field, not so much in academics. So.
Good ma'am.
Yeah.
We count all undergrad coursework on this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. No, it was actually a very good podcast. I just
all
figured
your
I'd
credits
hop on
will
here.
transfer to Patriot Bible College.
I thought you were going to say our belong to us, but that works too. We're sending love to all 2000s memes.
Aw. No, I just figured I'd pop on and say hi and encourage. Oh, then I guess we have another person that did CRM, Brian Stevens, in the comments, which I didn't realize, which is awesome because that's what I do. So, yeah, you guys are talking about how often you find things or don't find things. It's like the majority of the time I don't find anything. So it's yay, soil
it's
analysis.
Just a lot of
this
doing
is what
this.
I do. A lot of this.
Well, we'll be the first ones to tell you,
all-
JQ and Rob and I. That's why you dig Roman stuff, because you always find stuff. You actually start getting bored with the stuff you find.
Oh,
Like,
see,
hey,
that won't happen though.
like-
because
like-
even when we
like
don't
potter-
find
like
things,
pottery shirt.
I like seeing soil.
No, but
So even when we don't
Yeah.
find things, I'm finding stuff. When everyone else is bored out of their minds, not finding anything, I'm just like, oh my gosh, look, there's a fungus. It's
I still remember my first big piece of pottery I found. I was all
Mhm.
excited. It was about, I don't know, that big.
a pretty
I
good
thought
thing.
it was like moon landing. And again, Dr. Karavas, who's the co-director of our excavation, walked over and said, he looked at it, he goes, like, there was nothing on it. It was just plain ceramic, right? And he goes, and he threw it unceremoniously in the bucket. It was
Doesn't
like
that
the
just
first thing
hit
I'd
you
really
like so hard in the chest?
Yeah.
It's just like,
Made
oh
me-
man, I
made me
felt
very
so
sad.
proud of this, and they're just like, nah.
We all learn real quickly just how to deal with pottery. Oh yeah, first piece of pottery, and then
At least it
by,
was actually
by
a piece
your
of pottery.
100th, you're just like no.
Right, no, I feel the same way about pottery. It's not my go-to for sure. I'll just be like, oh hey, pottery, here, who wants it? It's like someone take it from me. I don't know how to analyze this. This is not mine.
There's more pottery than you guys can handle. That tends to be the scrapyard of the archaeological department.
Textiles too, not like cloth, but like mosaic or floor bases. Those tend to happen. Depends on where you are, but that tends to be one of the ones I come across a lot. Are like just tiles in general, which are kind of cool. But yeah,
Woohoo. And normally I have to go to Home Depot for that.
right. Well, these tiles are not the same, but it's just like layers of dirt that are finely thinned and polished because they're walked on as much as they are.
I like how you took my dad joke. And you're like, no, actually.
It's fine.
But woohoo!
So
Thank you so
did any
very
questions come
much,
in?
Natalie, to have you
Let's
on.
say, yeah,
We're looking for questions. Keep on tagging us. We do have one more person behind stage that we are going to bring in. But yeah, thank you so very much, Natalie.
We'll
We're
take a
about to
stab
go
at
into
that
open
one.
conversation, so just staying.
I'll just be backstage.
Uh-oh.
Or
Did we lose a Pat? Now Pat got
No,
something
you
to
can
say.
stay on, Natalie.
It
You don't have to go
happens.
Okay.
backstage. You
Oh,
it's
can
like
stay.
I'll just do whatever. I'm
Oh
here.
no,
Pat
we're
Just chime
mentioned
in
that I
if,
need to pop in.
chime in as you
Yes.
feel need.
Unless
you
you
want to.
see a volcano above you and it is fumes and
No,
just
I'll just
run.
let
We're
I'll
learning
just let
that
what
today.
happens because that way we can see what the true reactions are.
But it makes for lots of good storylines in mythology and science fiction. A shout out to Loki. That's my latest pinpoint. But we are bringing in a very stable dog. I hope you are doing good as we are skeptic and ranting on Do Archaeologists, all of us, as I English all over. Thinking absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I hope you are doing well. And what are your thoughts, comments, or thought bubbles on anything we have been talking about or the subject itself?
You know, I love
Hey, dog.
you, Abe. Always have done. And how are you, everybody? But archaeology is not an exact science, as all you archaeologists know. I mean, if you want to go into time dating and things like that, you have to bring in geology, which is totally different. Although we all know Mount Vesuvius was erupted before the Bible was written or the New Testament was written. And yeah, it's fun. You guys are right at the end of the day. You've got it all right. Shit happened in Pompeii, but I've got weird feelings about the date.
So you're asking them what are their views on the actual date of Pompeii?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I was just trying to steel man what you just said.
What do you guys
For
think?
your question.
I'm kind of agnostic on it. I think we have a literary tradition that is, been widely accepted, but there's some reason to doubt the data is being as accurate as it was once believed to be, based on some of the emerging scholarship out of the site in the last 20 years. I think the people digging at Pompeii and are, looking at the material culture. I mean, there's entire disciplines where people are looking at like ancient food, and trying to figure out like, were these plants available at the time that supposedly the events occurred? And I think there's some reason to, always question this stuff. I don't think an archaeologist, historian, or anybody should be 100% on anything in their discipline, because if you're always 100%, you're dogmatic. And particularly archaeology is highly interpretive. We like to say it's highly quantitative, and it can be, but even that quantification is often requires a fair amount of qualitative analysis. It's a lot of interpretation in archaeology, which makes it less precise than something like physics or geology.
And that's exactly how I feel. There is nothing that is 100%, especially archaeology, where it is just digging up stuff. And I have to say, by the way, that I have to agree with that Roman stuff in the UK is pretty boring. It's Saxon stuff we're after. That's where the money is.
Okay.
Anglo-Saxon
So
archaeology?
are you saying you're skeptical of archaeology?
Not at all.
Oh, not at all. Okay, I misread
He's
that.
just he's sharing his preferences with what he believes is
all
what
I'm
his
saying
personal favorites are.
is that
Gotcha.
you cannot class archaeology to timelines.
Archaeology is better at getting a specific number, a specific date than geology is. Geology can get a roundabout location and timeline, and we can confirm it with various variables, with different variables and different styles of methodology. So, like, we can look at tree rings, and we can look at speleothems, and we can look at ice cores, and we can look at various sedimentology or sedimentary stratigraphy in water or even on land that will tell us an event and overlap those different methods to know what kind of climate was happening at what time and how long it lasted.
Geology, though?
Say what?
Is that not geology?
That's a piece about that's geology. There's bits of that are some of it's like climatology, and it falls under the geologic bubble.
Yeah, well, archaeology is finding stuff and digging it up with a brush.
I'd argue that geology is also digging stuff up in the brush.
Yeah, but the geology is the timeline. Archaeology is finding. Is it not?
Can be, but then what do you explain is what's this about oil and finding it?
Well, if you want to go into Donald Trump, then we're joking, of course.
Oh shit!
No.
And on
Actually,
that
no,
note, before we go, we're just go. We got one more person.
No one wants to go there.
No. Stay around for the conference. We just have to do everyone's opener. Do you have any more? Because we got someone else backstage, so we're gonna get him in, and then we're just gonna do open conversation.
Well, all I'm saying is that every science has a flaw, and
agreed.
Archaeology is not time based. There's no timeline. Archaeology, they just find it, and geology comes in to find the soil samples and the compression of the soil or compression of the rock or whatever. This is the difference in the sciences. They're all flawed. Don't get me wrong, I love science. I do love it. But they all have their Yeah, they all have their, well, I don't want to say flaws again, but they're not
Not every
all
science is
science
foolproof. Is that what you're trying to say?
are not foolproof. Yeah, that's
They're
the
all
word.
fallible in some way.
They all have limitations to their methodology. That's the issue.
Well, that's because we
this,
study various things. Their focus isn't
Right.
on the same thing. So of course there's going to be different.
Right.
You
different
guys are a
issues.
lot better than me, but yeah, you said it. You said it. They're all. Go on, Amy. I'll let you carry on. You're the girl.
No,
Thank
okay.
you.
And we just want to say thank you so very much, a very stable dog, for joining us. We're about to go in the open conversation. We just got one more person, and then
Is
we'll
that
just
dog
have
wearing a
20,
mitre?
30 minutes of open dialogue before anyone can join us at our
Is that the holy
Discord
dog?
after shows. That's where we got a very holy dog. Oh, that's a cute digest. That's right. A little priest dog. And all right, we are going to get Wildheart in here as we are skeptic and ranting on Do Archaeologists thinking absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Wildheart, I hope you are doing good. And what are your thoughts about anything we've been talking about or the subject itself?
Just thanks for letting me on. It's been very interesting. I've learned a few things. I'm a layman. I know nothing about archaeology. We had a program in the UK called Time Team that was all about archaeology, and I've watched every single episode about 20 times. But that's all I know, so I'll pass over to the clever people.
And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is our deck tonight that we're working with our 3 special guest hosts and a 4th archaeologist, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bonus, like the family pack at Walgreens. So come
Baker's
one,
dozen.
come all, a baker's dozen. As we are having some skeptic and ranting fun, the link of which is in chat. But the floor is all yours, guys.
Well, Time Team was hosted by Baldrick off Blackadder.
Yeah, it was. He wasn't doing a comedy bit though. It was a serious program. Well, yeah, it was Baldwin.
Just to to keep in track, again, we can only be responsible for our discipline as far as our discipline hours go, but that's one thing. Like an archaeologist, if we're on a site, let's just say we're going to a site, we're doing preliminaries, we're going to bring out geologists, we're going to bring out botanists, particularly botanists that specialize in identifying ancient plants as well as their modern equivalents. In some cases, we don't. In archaeology, luckily, we don't have to. What JQ, Rob, and I look at is we're not going back. We're not Neolithic specialists or anything like that. Which is, again, your area becomes quietly specialized, right? Like you may know some things about Bronze Age sites, but then in archaeology, you tend to focus on a time period, right? And JQ, Rob, and I all kind of focused in roughly the same period, although we have some regional differences. Like Rob's obsessed with Italy, just so you know, obsessed to like the nth degree. But that's important to understand that this is, you also develop a specialty within your specialty, and I don't know how else to define it. And so you bring a talented pool of people out, even archaeologists. Like we have specialists, like we have people that specialize in epigraphy. These are the people that like look at some. We have special people that specialize in ceramics, and we joke, we give them their own special name. They get to be called ceramicists because you hold up a piece of pottery and they go, "Oh, it's this," and I
want to be a ceramicist.
Like, no, you don't. You have to memorize way too much stuff.
No, you don't.
I know we have.
They'll even bring in geologists to look at diatom content to assess water quality of a location.
Yes, and that is actually one of my one of the women that actually graduated with me. She is a specialist in diatoms and plankton, and she does paleo geology in the Bahamas right now, and she is awesome at what she does. And the poor thing is just
Well, I
tan
need to do studies that.
Like, yeah, no, she's just tan year round.
Excuse me, graduate professor. Awesome. I need to go to the Bahamas. It's for research.
Oh yeah, no. So
those diatoms, they really need to be studied.
No, it was. We went down. We have our own little island that we go to. We all get bug bites like crazy, but we're outside taking water samples, taking core samples the entire time, looking under microscopes. I cannot tell you how cross-eyed I was every night when I would go to bed, because you're just looking at a microscope at these tiny itty bitty little forams just to be able to tell the water quality around a certain island. So yeah, these are things you learn, and some people just get really caught up in it. In her case, she's obviously now she has a PhD in it, so she's awesome. I just went straight to work after school, so I just haven't had a chance to keep going to school.
But, what about the
once in a while we do need to eat
found on Earth?
I'm sorry?
The new mineral found on Earth, diorite, or whatever it's called. It's
I cannot speak on that. I don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, granted, not everyone knows a lot about it, but
it's been found in the universe, but it's been found on Earth now. It was found in a diamond, within a diamond, and it's called the diorite.
Diorite.
Diorite. I'm saying it's diorite. It's probably something that I've got wrong, but I'm saying diorite. It's a brand new mineral being found. It only exists near the heat of the core. Obviously, diamonds are found near the core. But it's called diorite. And it's not.
I don't know a whole lot about this. This is something that would be a new topic. I'd have to do studies before I can speak on any of it.
Yeah, it's not a new mineral. It is an old mineral, but people thought it would never be found on this planet. But we found it now.
I mean,
are you talking about?
It's always fun.
Are you talking about Kernowite? Kernowite. They found it in Cornwall. I just indexed the Journal of Geology.
I was going to say, like, I'm trying to type this in, I'm not finding anything. So
yeah, it's Kern, Kernowite. There's a recent 2-year-old journal article on it. Again, I'm not a geologist.
It was probably found in with most minerals are all found in Africa. Isn't that
JQ got summoned again?
Damn, summoned by Satan has to sell timeshares in hell, but it's okay. It's lovely down there.
As far as a mineral goes, it is interesting. There's a lot to be learned about it. I mean, I think it was postulated and like theorized for a really long time prior to being discovered on Earth. So,
spectrometers find all these minerals and whatnot.
Yeah, they do.
On different planets. But it was apparently it's an old mineral, but it's been found on Earth. So that makes it interesting to me anyway. And but obviously to any other thing. But at the end of the day, didn't know why start in Africa.
Wait, are you bringing up dark matter now?
I'm just bringing up life.
Yeah.
This is getting way
I
outside
will
of
say
our
I'm
line
going
of
to
study.
I'm going to. Well, that's funny you say that. I want to make a point before I bring up a question. I have noticed something, that the more expertise an academic has, the more that they refer to other academics who have expertise in proper fields.
We don't want to
truly
say the
does
wrong
seem
thing.
to be-
We'll get called out on it.
Exactly. But see, it tends to be the BS artists that tend to just they talk on the fly because it doesn't matter what sticks. But in
Like the
academic, they
creationists,
want to make sure they want to know their sources are
Yeah.
exactly. You want to know.
No, see, if
what
you
you're
want to talk
talking
about chert and sedimentary rocks, I can discuss those a little more in depth than I can about postulated and new minerals, and definitely more so than dark matter. As much as I like
Dark
to postulate on
matter's
that.
not my thing.
Yeah, dark
I
matter's
think
not my
that's a
thing.
different podcast.
Yes.
But I will say we have a question from Mark Reed.
Wonderful.
Keep on sending your questions in, tagging James and I at Amy Newman. Which materials preserve the best or give the most information about a culture? Thanks, Mark.
Ooh, that's a good question. And I wish we almost had flashcards where Rob, Pat, and I could just write and hold it up.
I do too. I feel like I want to answer this one too, but go on.
Grand.
So
Natalie, you are
I'm gonna start
welcome
because
to.
I'm junior. I'm junior. So I'm gonna go first because she's gonna
Sure.
talk about rocks. I don't want to talk.
I am going to talk about
I
rocks.
say ceramics.
I agree with Pat.
As far as like talking about culture, I'll agree with that simply because you can learn a lot based off of how someone makes a ceramic. But as far as like necessity of tools, I want to say chert and flint because you'll end up finding some of the coolest weaponry. Oh, shush, Pat. I will stick with my projectile points. Thank you very much. My hose and my drill bits and everything, because the rocks will stay preserved. They will stick
Those
around.
hose, okay.
Yeah, those
Jet
hose.
time is
of the
flint is the point of an arrow.
I'm sorry. Some of an arrow.
Flint is the point of an arrow. In the old days, a sharpened flint was the
Yes.
point of an arrow. So
Yes.
you know that makes. No, I just found it funny that you said that, I'll sharpen my tools on this and that, and flint.
Need a new flint.
Obviously.
Oh, I use flint because it's I guess layman's term for chert. No one knows really what I'm talking about when I say chert or chert nodules. That they will when I hear flint or when they hear flint, they're like, oh yeah, they're up at arrowheads. I know what
You would have guessed correctly with me. I heard someone be like, "Oh no, I do that." I wouldn't.
No,
I'm going to defend ceramics over flint because of the time period we study.
That's a good point. So, you do study a different time period than I do.
Right. So when we, I would look at, and the good thing about ceramics is everyone in society used them, rich, poor alike. So, you can gauge a culture and get a cross section.
The wealth of information that you can glean from ceramics is immense, particularly for the time period that we have been talking about. It's not only manufacturing of ceramics, but it talks about economy, it talks about trade routes, it talks about production, it talks about regional productions, it's talking about daily life, and I mean the list just goes on and on and on. So as much as we may bash on ceramics because we just find it in spades in the archaeological record, it is probably one of the most crucial things that we can have analyzed to try and understand not only like localized sites, but how those sites then interact within wider regions and wider geographies. So,
but if you're studying Neolithic sites, Nat is actually right.
Oh yes, totally different story.
Which is that and older tends to be what I look at. I also look at like the style and not the style, but the type of chert itself and its locations. I like to map. I plan on getting a PhD eventually. My thesis is already kind of set in stone, you could say. I have a few professors that are.
Oh no, I can't miss a dad joke.
I can do dad jokes too. Okay, I'm not a dad, but I can do them.
Get your drum set, Amy.
I dig it.
Right?
I dig it.
Yeah.
Oh, see that both of you now.
There's a lot more, but yeah, to be able to map out trade routes based off of chert supply, that's kind of what I'm really interested in. I was one of the students that helped create the chert library for the University of Iowa, which has over 76 different minerals or different styles of chert found within Iowa, because there's 76 different sources that are, or it's different types of chert in general. Their location, what they look like when they're heat treated, and their permeability, which is pretty awesome to work with. And then there's a bunch of other stuff in there from like different states, samples that we've had sent in, things like that. But yeah, I just want to keep expanding on that library and hopefully.
Who has the best flint?
Who has the best flint? Ooh. There is a type
Flint,
of
Michigan.
No.
Tip your waitress, folks.
So North Dakota has an amazing flint. Obviously, I'm from Knife River. That's the reason why the river is called Knife River. It's a flint that you can almost see through. It's like an agate, and it breaks beautifully. Obsidian is one of my favorites to work with. So you can go to Oregon and you can find the various obsidians. And then I think Oklahoma has a really interesting one that's a steel flint, which is a slate gray color, and it is just gorgeous when you look at it. But there's a lot of different ones. Those ones are just my personal favorites whenever I come across them, because when I come across that steel flint and I'm in like Kentucky, I get really excited because you're like, oh man, there's a connection.
And I am just excited. I just want to say I am so happy. Basically, all of the archaeologists got excited from that question. So I'm very.
I think Rob
sure. So
yeah, Rob has an answer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Rob, if you would like to comment to that question, and then when you're done, I'll let you say something. A very stable dog, and then we actually have one or two more questions that just came in, but we got 10 or 15 more minutes left before we roll into our outros for the night. But Rob, the floor is yours if you want to answer that question.
About
ceramics, flint?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with ceramics. Yeah, I mean, I agree that somebody else should do it and not me. But
no one wants to touch the ceramics, but you all claim it's the best thing.
It's important, but it's important that somebody else does it. Yeah.
Just real quick, I just want to point out how excited Natalie got talking about rocks. I don't get that excited when you're moving them 40-pound buckets at a time. Like, that's one thing about archaeology. You got to move rocks. I want to see the geologist going, oh, not me. It's like, just throw it in the bucket. We got to move it. Put it in the wheelbarrow.
I'd say they have curves, but it's actually edges. I'm done. I'm walking out now.
I was gonna say I'm fully expecting if I'm ever on a dig site with Pat, I fully expect him to yell at me, "Stop looking at rocks."
I've worked with geologists on excavations before, and then they're looking. It's like, we don't do that here. We got to keep digging.
Move it along.
You could do that after we're done for the day. Put the rock in the pocket.
Expect me to like have my own bucket off to the side. It's like Nat's rocks to like look at.
That is fine. Yeah.
Just be like, and that one's gonna go in the pile.
Yep.
We get that from volunteers though too, right? Like, what do I do with this pretty rock? Well, you
throw it.
I don't know.
You throw it with the rest of the rocks over there.
Yeah. If you have a question about it, stick it in your pocket and talk to the geologist later.
Yeah.
Unless it's marble, we save every piece of marble.
And then you save it. Yeah, if it's marble, alabaster, soapstone, these are things that you want to hold on to.
Porphyry.
Yes.
Why are they like special? Are they
those
really
are
rare?
what you can sculpt things out of or build certain structures with. Those are highly valuable, attainable materials that if you come across, you definitely want to hold on to and collect, because there's a chance that you're going to find more.
Don't put them on eBay.
If you find that stuff, it's almost guaranteed it wasn't locally mined. It came from somewhere else outside. So you can probably figure out where this whatever alabaster, marble, or whatever came from in a Roman context throughout the Roman Empire, even outside the empire in some cases.
Oh yeah, and like depending on where you are.
Amazing archaeology.
I'm sorry.
How did in biblical times in the Bronze Age, how did they fight so many wars in the Bronze Age?
You went out the last second of that. How did they fight so many wars? It was going in a little bit.
In Bible times.
So many holy wars. Considering
I can answer this one. Religion.
I have a related question as well. If the archaeologists could answer whether they believe the Exodus existed, but they always say there's little evidence for that.
I still think the panel is trying to understand the question.
Yeah.
Right, sorry.
Oh no, you're fine.
So, well, I know how to rewrite the Bible. I know how to rewrite in 4 words. We'll rewrite the Bible. Instead of in the beginning, change it to once upon a time, and it's done. It's a fairy tale, then.
I wasn't sure where you were going, but I agree with your last statement. But I'm not sure that's the panel. I'm the unacademic here.
Well,
I remain Yeah. Well, as far as the Exodus, because I think that was the beginning of your question, I'm unconvinced the Exodus happened. I'm unconvinced from the archaeological record that the Exodus is an actual historical event as portrayed in the Old Testament versus a limited regional control of Egypt, of Palestine, and it just being represented in text in a different way.
I
don't think the Exodus actually happened.
What I was asking was, the only metal they had in them days was bronze and a bit of copper. How did they have so many holy wars with bronze and copper?
You mean wars? You mean in the Bronze Age? How come they had so many wars with only bronze and copper? Because bronze can make pretty decent weapons, and I mean, you can, there's a kind of a misnomer in. I'm not a weapons specialist, but I know a fair amount. There's a misconception because we think of iron and steel by modern standards, but even earlier versions of iron and steel are different than modern versions of iron and steel. Basically, all a weapon really needs to be is have a reliable cutting edge versus the material that it's going to be going up against. So in societies where you don't wear a lot of armor, or you wear armor that's not as hard as bronze, bronze is perfectly good as a weapon and a cutting edge. Now, does bronze go duller than, say, for example, iron? Well, yes, it does. But bronze on bronze weapons, that's why you carry more than one weapon. You carry a spear, you carry a sword, and these things are warfare. Was violent regardless of when it was fought and with what weapons it was fought with.
And I'm gonna like the theme of my night here. Bronze Age warfare, Iron Age warfare, all the way through even to the Roman period that we're talking about, it shouldn't be understood that the weapons with which they were using was exclusively bronze. Like, again, the ability to own bronze weapons, the ability to own iron weapons is something that is going to be reserved for a very, very select group of the population. There's going to be a wide variety of other weapons that are used within these types of warfare that are not going to be metallic whatsoever. So slingers, for example, who are just going to have a leather sling and some
rocks.
There's going to be a wide range of the types of soldiers that you're going to be seeing that are going to be dependent on the culture or society that are fighting, the time period that you're looking at. And so Pat's absolutely right. For those people, for those soldiers who would be fighting with bronze, the soldiers against whom they were fighting wouldn't be laden in bronze like some sort of medieval knight. They would have been much more ill-equipped to be able to deal with the magnitude at which bronze would have been able to affect their armor and the human body. But to produce these sorts of weapons was a very labor and cost, a labor-intensive and cost-intensive process.
I get that.
I am going to interrupt you, a very stable dog. I know you want to make a point back, but we actually have to get Courageous in here and then ask a few final questions. But if there is more time, I'll let you ask some more as well. But I want to get Courageous in here because she has some questions for the panel. So we are sending all of our hearts as we are skeptic and ranting on Do Archaeologists Think in Absence of Evidence is Not Evidence of Absence? Hope you're doing well. And what are your thoughts, questions, or comments about the subject or anything we've been talking about tonight?
Okay. Hi guys. Okay, so I've been listening all along. I've just been working, and so I'm finally off. So I'm like, okay, cool. I could hop on for just a minute. So I guess, especially with like the kind of the question in mind, for me, when I was deconstructing from my faith, one of the big cornerstones for me was trying to find historical and archaeological evidence for Jesus's resurrection. And that was something that, like, for me, nothing that I was finding was like sufficient. There was a lot of, like one thing was like the sources were biased, and they and some of their qualifications I just didn't find acceptable. But I was reminded of this the other day because Captain Dadpool made a TikTok that was responding to the case for Christ, and how he didn't, like when Lee Strobel only contacted like Christian sources and he didn't contact historians or archaeologists. And my dad was over listening. He was like, why would he contact them? And I was just like, what?
Contact historians and archaeologists, you mean?
Yeah, about like evidence, building a case for the evidence of Jesus. And I'm like, it seems pretty important to qualify whether he was an actual historical person, but also the things surrounding his life. If you're going to base your whole value system and worldview on it, that there should be evidence for it. But then at the same time, like I'm also not a mythicist, so yeah, I guess I don't know if you get how like the main question was sparking that, but I
agree. The Romans were very, very good record keepers, and there is not one record for Jesus whatsoever in Roman records. Obviously, if you dig deep into the vault of the Vatican, you will see him as being God, and you'll probably find some Nazi gold in there as well. Look at the Bigelow report if anyone is interested in the Catholics' version of war. They embrace war, they embrace everything. They like to get their claws into a lot of things. And the Vatican is the only country or sovereign state that is in the green. Every other country owes money to someone, somewhere, or whoever. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think we wanted to get to hear from the rest of the panel.
I do want to say, I was going to bring up a question. Was there something that you wanted to answer? If not, I have.
There was something that Mark mentioned in the chat just a second ago.
Well, and so we'll go. I'm going to bring it up. So Materialist Dan asked, what's the panel's opinion of how confidently we can say the Exodus didn't happen based solely on tonight's topics? That's similar to what was being asked the past few minutes.
Well, I think that we should speak to the question that was just posed first, because I don't think that we have done. Sorry, I didn't catch.
No, I agree.
No.
Craig's question. Cray asked, yeah.
Cray, so, okay, thank you. You know, to answer their question first. So the first point to which you were speaking, and Pat and Rob, I would definitely welcome your input on this. I will admit I'm not a biblical archaeologist, but I have noticed one thing that keeps it. I read it in the comments a couple of times during the conversation tonight, going all the way back to the beginning of this session, as well as it reemerging here in the Q&A part. And that's everyone keeps saying, oh, well, there's no record, there's no account or record in Roman literature of Jesus being executed. And that's to mistake the magnitude with which people put emphasis on the Bible to how the Romans actually would have used crucifixion as a method of execution during the Roman period. To think that the Romans would have ever have taken the time to record the execution via crucifixion of one person who was considered a criminal within the Roman Empire is just completely incorrect. The Romans were crucifying people left, right, and center before the time of Christ and well after the time of Christ. So in the Roman mindset, this was just an ordinary day, and there would have been nothing unique or special about the crucifixion of Jesus as opposed to the crucifixion of anyone else. So I think that you need to detach those two points and understand the historical reality as it probably existed in the 1st century CE versus the importance that has been placed on biblical literature as it exists today. The two are completely divorced from one another. To speak to your other question, which is about the archaeological evidence for the resurrection as it exists in biblical literature, really the only thing that I can say to that, and this is where Pat and Rob, I welcome you to please chime in here and piggyback on what I'm saying, is at least according to my understanding or my knowledge of the story of resurrection, that is an event as portrayed within biblical literature that would not leave a footprint in an archaeological record that would be detectable by modern day historians or archaeologists. The whole being entombed in a cave that's enclosed by a rock, caves within this part of the ancient Mediterranean world are plentiful, unless you start to find very specific material culture within caves that can speak to their use and their function. It's going to be very hard to detect, the way that the Bible portrays that particular event. So that's really the best that I'm going to be able to speak towards that.
I really have to agree with you. In the Bible, Jesus was a criminal. Well, that's the only reason he was crucified. He was a criminal. He was a blasphemous. He was a criminal in Herodic law. He was a criminal in Roman law. The only reason his disciples did not go up to see him crucified, which was the normal death for Romans that day, or in them days, they just nailed someone to a cross, was because they too were being hunted. Jesus was an enemy of the state, basically, but it has to be true because it's still shown in the Bible.
Right. So and I also think that we have to challenge the account in its entirety, given the standards of what we know about the Roman state. Right. So
absolutely.
So would a common non-citizen, again, you expect to find, we have records of notable people in history, senators, Roman aristocracy, even non-Roman aristocracy, social elites. We know about their executions because they end up in records. But average Joe isn't going to end up in the Roman historical record. And Romans very rarely attributed any type of special treatment of the deceased after execution. Mass grave was the most common mode of disposal on purpose because the Romans were religiously inclined to deny a person a proper burial as a sign of social disrespect for their crime. The Romans believed in ancestor worship, and contact with the dead through their body and remains was something the Romans very often purposely denied those who had been convicted of crimes, particularly commoners. Now, social elites could occasionally get access to the bodies of those that were executed, but among the commoners, what would be known as a pauper common burial in a mass grave for everybody that was executed that day. People died in the ancient world all the time. There were mass graves all over the place. And the Romans, typically, that's where criminals ended up. And if that, we'd have a hard time even saying if Jesus was put in a tomb, but just because of the story.
I guess, so for me, the things that I wonder is because, a lot of, the reason that, the disciples didn't write it down is because, they couldn't read and write. But even when you had a whole society, I think of when Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead, everyone in that entire area would have witnessed that miracle. How often was it that everybody was illiterate, so there wasn't a single person that knew how to read and write and knew that there wouldn't be any writings or anything about when something something that is completely outside of the norm, do you know what I mean? That so I don't see that as definitive proof that there isn't that evidence, but it just seems questionable to me.
Well, Paul, the Bible, he was the founder of Christianity, and he wrote it on hearsay, obviously.
Yeah, but that was 20, 30 years later.
However many years later. But he wrote it on hearsay, and the Bible has been manipulated. And the last rewrite of the Bible was 1998. I mean, we're going back less than 20 years ago. Just over 23 years ago, it was rewritten again.
So, yeah.
Guys, I want to get through the two questions from Sunday Worship and then get Oz in. Oz is going to be our last person of the night.
Well, and then the Exodus.
Just real quick, Cray. There's only one account of the raising of Lazarus, and that's in John, right? So it's important to remember we only have one literary account.
And that's the most. That's the least reliable.
That's the latest.
The four Gospels.
And John is the latest. John, depending on which textual critic you want to use as your opinion, or all of them, the survey of the dates for John are between 90 and 110. Most historians are around the 100 date. Some people still stay 95. Some say 105. But it is the latest and most mythologized as far as Jesus being a divine being on earth and stating he's a divine being on earth of all of them. It's interesting that how that account happens. Remember, in that account, Jesus actually waits for Lazarus to die before he goes so that he can, quote unquote, show everybody how cool he is by raising him from the dead. So again,
no ego there.
I don't. Again, this is the problem with the literature of the genre, making stuff up. And even if Jesus was a historical person, saying he did all this awesome stuff was what you would expect given the literature of the period. Historians did it. No one thinks Vespasian was walking around healing people by touch, but we have accounts of Vespasian doing miraculous things. He just happened to be emperor, so people wrote it down, and we know he was alive. There's there's a lot more information on Vespasian than there is on Jesus of Nazareth or whoever he was.
I'm going to ask this from Sunday Worship. Get Oz in, and then we're going to start to wrap up, guys. So if you do have a question,
I just
send
don't
it
want to
in
forget
now.
Quinn's question about Exodus as well.
Okay. So Exodus, real quick. I don't think Exodus occurred. That was me.
Agreed.
Can I elaborate?
That was pretty definitive. Yeah. No, didn't happen.
It's a personal
do
opinion.
want
There's no evidence, so I'm letting that go.
So do any of the guests have an opinion on whether Bardia, son of Sirius the Great, was actually impersonated by a lookalike Magus Guatemante? Sorry if it's off topic. I got here late.
Not at all, but I am going to elaborate on the lake of fire.
I think we have to move on to get Oz on Stable Dog, and then if you'll get an outro, you'll be able to make any remarks that you want at the end.
Go on then. I was just saying that the lake of fire that was introduced in the King James version of 1611, based on Dante's ironic comedy Inferno, or part of the poetry of Dante, which is pretty good actually.
Is it erotic poetry? Is that what you said?
Ironic.
What did you
poetry.
say? I'm sorry.
It was ironic poetry.
Oh, ironic. Okay. The erotic fits our bill better, even better.
Dante.
Didn't you know that Dante? Yeah, didn't you know that the Dante's 9 levels of hell are actually just erotic fantasies? So obviously,
dude, that would be really good. Like, if the writer wanted to.
Don't listen to me. Don't listen to me.
Well, hell in scripture is Sheol. S-H-E-O. Well, Sheol. Anyway,
it's one of them. Yes, there are more than one.
Eternal nothingness or black or grey. That's what it means, and that is hell. Is just
closer to the actual truth,
and that's where we're all going. But
we're going to get Oz in here. I see more people. I see Wesley. You just joined back. Oz,
I don't think we'll be able to get Wesley on tonight, unfortunately.
And ranting on do archaeologists think in absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, though we can go on later in the Discord. We're going to have our little after show.
We can bring him over to the Discord. Yeah.
But Oz, what are your thoughts about, I hope you're doing well, and what are your thoughts about anything we've been talking about or subject itself?
Well, I came on and it was about Jesus, so I just want to say Jesus is a myth.
Thank you, Oz.
So, I mean, that kind of goes with it. Is the absence of evidence of absence?
It's official. Dan can prophesy.
Is it another way of saying archaeologists are flat earthers?
What?
Jesus is still a myth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Archaeologists are flat earthers.
Where did you hear this?
What?
Well, no, I'm just saying that's just similar.
It's not similar. That's a bullshit. That's a bullshit argument that people love to lay out. Is mythicists are equal to flat earthers, and that's not the case whatsoever.
I know. I just put it in there for a joke.
Okay, well, I can never tell who's joking and who's not, but Jesus is a myth.
It's Poe's Law. And all right, on that note, we're going to bring up the last few questions. I think what I'll let you do, Wesley, when we go to outros, I'll let you say an outro if you could be quick, but we are finishing up. Do the archaeologists ever worry they will run out of ruins or things to dig up? You think what will the future of archaeology going forward?
I'll let JQ handle this.
Lateral pass. No. So no, archaeologists are not ever worried that there's going to be a lack of materials to dig up. So I'm going to bring just the example of the site that the three of us worked at. The site that we worked at, and I'll also talk about Pompeii because that's the other major site that we kind of touched upon tonight. But first off, Palmyra is the site that Rob, Pat, and I all worked on, has been excavated systematically since 1981. And only a small fraction of the military fort has been excavated to the latest periods of occupation. So the military fort was originally established in the late 1st or early 2nd century CE, and then it gets abandoned in the 7th century CE. Since 1981, they've been able to excavate the northern and eastern and parts of the western part of the fort that really focus on the fortification wall. So that's taken 40 years for them to do just that part alone, and that's only excavating about the 5th, 6th, and 7th century occupation. And that's not to even mention the entire civil settlement as well as naval settlement that was attached to the fortification that could have held anywhere between maybe 7,000 and 10,000 people. So, I mean, we're talking about at one specific site, more archaeological work than can be done in multiple generations of historians and archaeologists. So then to focus, another example being Pompeii. Pompeii has been systematically excavated since the late 19th century, and they still have an immense amount of work to conduct there. And again, that's one site, and there are thousands and thousands of just, Roman sites throughout Europe, or Roman and native sites throughout Europe, or just native sites throughout Europe, and every combination thereof, and then that can be extrapolated to so many different time periods and so many different geographical regions and so many different cultures. And that's not even to mention the fact that we as humans continue to occupy and inhabit this planet, and archaeology can span all the way up to periods such as World War II. There's archaeologists who are excavating World War II battle sites in both the Pacific as well as in Europe. And that is within living memory of today. So the fact that we continue to inhabit the planet and continue to occupy places will continue to promote the field of archaeology indefinitely into the future.
And I'd only add that as our methodology and scientific equipment ggets better, we don't have to be we can do methods that don't require us to dig. We also are better at identifying sites. But the problem is, in many ways, when it actually comes to digging, as we get better and better with our methodology, we get slower and slower. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but as we get better, we move less dirt. Yeah, what are you saying, Pat? It's true.
We don't excavate with dynamite anymore, and we get all the way into the intricacies of pollen analysis and soil analysis and all of that sort of stuff, which, even 25, 50 years ago, people weren't concerning themselves with, couldn't even fathom doing that kind of stuff in the earliest, the earliest beginnings of archaeology as a discipline. So, how will that progress moving forward 25, 50, 100 years?
I'd like to.
Dynamite doesn't sound like a clean method of investigation.
What isn't a clean method?
Dynamite. That does not sound like a.
When done accurately, it's not bad. But for archaeologists, it's not so great.
I'd like to.
All right, a few more questions, then we'll go to outros. What were you saying? I am going to bring this up.
I would like to
Can you
applaud
ask?
archaeology because they disprove the Bible for one, and even this week, they got some paleontologists in and discovered a new dinosaur or type of dinosaur.
We're always discovering dinosaurs. That's the fun part. Actually, it's not actually a dinosaur. It's earlier than dinosaurs, but yes.
Only this week, Marley.
And Pseudonym asks, can you ask the panel what they consider the first civilization, I assume was? I've heard Sumeria at about 6,500 BC. What to do with Indus at 7,500 BC to Clovis people 13,000 years ago. Back to Syria, then Sapatria in Greece 135,000 years ago. Any relation to out of Africa theory with pyramids only 3,500 BC?
Well, I go back to vestigial organs and the tree climbing muscles that about 80% of humans still have. And they group together. So I'm
Thank you for that.
Is a very stable dog an archaeologist?
No.
Okay, because they keep asking the archaeologist questions and dog keeps answering instead. So I was just wanted to clarify.
So Rob?
I just wanted, so they want to know though, what do you guys think is the first civilization? Is such a thing even possible to pinpoint?
It's not impossible to pinpoint, but I don't think we've pinpointed enough evidence to definitively say that there is one over another as far as the original civilization. However, that's not my area of expertise.
On your definition of civilization.
Yeah,
too, right?
it does. It changes too.
Sure.
So it's a bit tricky. And I mean, when we're talking about civilization, are we focusing only on Homo erectus, Homo sapien? Who are we talking about here? Because we do
specifically Homo heidelbergensis specifically, but
there are two people talking. I could not.
Whoever was talking?
That's what I was saying.
Okay. Well, there is someone who was bringing up a Homo erectus comment. I was trying to find that, and I think that's going to, in a second, bring us to the end of it. Here we go. X Music asks, is anyone else excited about Homo erectus and recent findings like tools with designs on them?
Yes, I'm excited. That's all I'm going to say about that, though.
I'm not excited about it.
And
I think it's interesting.
I hadn't heard about it, but it.
You're not excited about it. You're just like, yes, this is new information. Awesome.
But now that I've heard about it, I am excited about it.
Lies.
Yeah.
Jesus is a myth.
Praise Jesus.
Yeah. But seriously, I think that when we talk about civilizations, we're talking about sedentary agrarian societies. And I think, my focus is on the Mediterranean. I know that's JQ and Rob's wheelhouse as well. It's to say which, I'm not familiar enough with the archaeology. I know there's debates in various parts of disciplines throughout the world among archaeologists and anthropologists about where is the first. Because, again, this is where we have to be very careful. I'm going to pontificate for a moment. This is where archaeologists sometimes play into national politics without knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For a long time, the argument between Egypt before Mesopotamia before Egypt, who had the first written language, who was the first, quote unquote, monumental buildings, communities. This, even though the archaeologists wanted to find the answer, they were pushed in their whatever they were doing was sometimes driven, not always, but sometimes driven by nationalistic politics. Now, I'm not going to buy into that because I don't know enough about India. I don't know enough about China and other regions of the world to say I can definitively show. I know generally when we talk about the Mediterranean, which cultures around the Mediterranean popped up first, but even then we give everything a grain of salt. We always say based on current information as we've currently analyzed. And it appears that Anatolia may actually be the earliest, quote unquote, settlement that we've identified as an agrarian society and civilization, but that may change.
I would have to agree with Pat. That's not necessarily a straightforward question. I think for a long time people have wanted to say this place or that place, and I think that there might be regions, plural, not a region, but regions plural globally that might hold the answer to that. But I think that the more people investigate moving further back in time, and particularly moving further back in time from the Bronze Age, and often the Bronze Age, I think, holds the position for where people like to place the first civilization, but it's a mixture of a lot of these talking points. What Rob said about, first off, how are you going to describe, or how are you going to define a civilization? I would agree with Pat that it probably has to be settled agrarian and not nomadic, pastoralist, something like that. But I think that as archaeologists continue to explore pre-Bronze Age, Chalcolithic, Neolithic age sites, we may be surprised by some of the evidence that could come out of that. And I know that that's probably not a satisfactory answer for the person who posed the question, but I think it's a lot more complicated than historians might have presented it in the past. This is a complex topic.
Accurate.
It's discussed a lot. I mean, this is one of those topics that sometimes we get drunk around a bonfire and discuss and just like throw out random hypotheses just because we want to see what sticks. But we'll do that with each other because, as we know, if we do that to the public, they're gonna freak out with some of the shit that we'll say. they'll take it for granted.
I'm sure we would.
I mean, yeah.
Has not the cradle of life been placed in Africa? And if you look at
that's a separate topic. Yeah,
that's a different. Yeah, this is
the human evolution versus something.
But I will say, if you do want to talk about any of these, we're about to head into the Discord after our outros for the after show where we can talk about anything. And I'm gonna see if I regret this, but we were talking about where did you guys go to college? Brandeis? What was it called? Brandeis. I think I'm going to throw the dice, and we are going to see about this last person. Wesley, you're going to start off our outros, but we are moving outros because we've had a fun and fabulous skeptic and ranting of do archaeologists thinking absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I do want to thank Pat, John, and Rob for being our special guest hosts, along with all of our regular guests. As we move into our outros, Wesley, I'll bring you back to start us off. We'll see if we're on topic. It's like I said, we're going to Atlantic City, ladies and gentlemen, and having some fun as we close out our skeptic and ranting. Hello, Wesley. I hope you are doing good. We are sending you much love. We just had a fantastic stream where we were taking an archaeological look at the question of, is absence of evidence not evidence of absence? What are you? I hope you're doing well. And what are your final thoughts on the subject?
Sure. Quickly, there is a word, it is called hole, H-O-L-E. It's not there, and yet it's there. There is a feeling that all of you and all on earth have had for the last 18 years when Jesus said it is time. And that feeling is from a rain, R-A-I-N, a latter rain, a white rain. It's a physical thing. And it falls on a person's body and it touches their souls and it makes them feel like Christmas Day.
Oh.
It makes them feel like Christmas Day. Now, I am given the key to the house of David. That is a dove that was on Noah's Ark. That is the star of Bethlehem. That is the throne of Jesus Christ. And in Scripture, it is written that I am given to open, none shall shut.
You're never going to hear the end of this one, Amy.
I just want to ask.
None shall open. At noon on the 12th of November, I shut all of your souls, that you do not get that rain inside of your bodies, your spiritual body.
Wait, you
And
did
do
this
not
personally?
have
You did
the
it?
vision. Yes, I did.
Oh.
Plug those holes.
Shit.
Plug that roof.
And I did this. Are you going to let me finish? I also did this.
I will let you. Can I just interrupt you? Can I interrupt you
Sure.
for 1 second? Because I do like listening to this topic, Wesley. We're just trying to keep it focused. So
I'm going to focus it in some reality that should affect every one of you. This feeling
But is
of
it
Christmas
archaeological
Day,
reality? Okay.
yes, is also removed from the Chinese military and the Russian military. And because it is gone, their hands are no longer stayed from attacking it. And they are on the way.
Fuck. Thank you, Wesley, for that.
I do thank you, Wesley. Like
one
I
other
said,
thing, if you're Jewish, blend, do not mix. I am.
Wow.
Fabrics?
All right.
Wow.
Thank you, Wesley. Let's time
What
to
the
move
fuck
on.
is
Thank
that?
you.
What?
Wow.
Do you
Don't
mean
ask.
fabrics? We're gonna pretend that you don't mix fabrics,
I want him to
even
mean
though that
fabrics.
would be kind of silly.
Yeah, because like
I
I'm
know
Jewish,
I like
so
mixed.
fuck off.
And my joke is normally I'm Jewish because my parents are Jewish and I like bacon. But yes, we are sending love to Wesley. Feel free to come on to the Discord and talk more about this. And we're going to have more theological discussions are our bread and butter. So don't think that I'm just poo-pooing you off.
You're not. Thanks for letting me on. Very kind of you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Wesley.
It's
And
just, this
all
is
right,
a very big, this is a worldwide thing.
It's big news.
Really,
Big news.
to have the dove
And
of
it's a big
Jesus
topic.
Christ and to be treated like this for 18 years, there comes a day soon when I shall no longer be put into the corners of anyone's rooms again.
Oh, that will
And
be a
all
dark
right,
day.
thank you
That will
so-
be a dark day.
And I
Yes,
just want to thank
it
you,
shall
as
be.
always, Wesley. We love our theist brothers and sisters who come on the show. So thank you so very much for joining. And we're going right down the line. Feel free to hop on with us as we go into Discord afterwards. But we are moving right down the line. As we have been skeptic and ranting on do archaeologists think in absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I hope you had a fun time. And what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are back in 1842, there was an archaeologist that was a god that showed up. And in 1842, told me then in 1942 that Pat Lowinger would show up. And he warned me that Pat Lowinger was just full of shit. Then told me that in 20 more years, Nat would show up. And that Nat was also full of shit. And after that, I would no longer be cornered in a circular room by these assholes. And that I could proclaim to the world that Jesus is a myth. I'm done.
Thanks, Oz.
Thank you, Oz.
Thank you so very much.
Much love, brother.
Praise Jeebus.
And because I can't stop shilling, Tart.live. And all right, we are moving right down the love. Let's send in love
Jeebus
from
dot,
my
not
brother
real.
from another mother, Oz. And courageous. We have been skeptic and ranting as we have been asking these archaeologists what they think in absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I hope you had a good time. And what are your
Somebody's
final
typing
thoughts?
really loud.
Yeah, no,
Please, Amy?
I've had I've had a wonderful time. Thanks for having me on and for answering my questions. I have the same username on Discord, Instagram, and TikTok. So feel free to check me out.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming on.
Woohoo! Thank you so very much, Courageous. And thank you for asking that awesome question. And all right, we're moving right down the line. Wildheart. Oh, Wildheart, actually, he said he did have to go. So we're sending
Good night, Wildheart.
Wildheart. And we're moving towards a very stable dog. Thank you so very much for joining us. I hope you had an enjoyable time on this Skeptic and Ranting. Do archaeologists think an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? And what are your final thoughts?
I've been on your show before, Amy, and it's always a pleasure. It was many months ago.
Thank you.
But the archaeologists on this show are amazing. They know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank
none
you.
of them will ever find evidence of Jesus, obviously, unless they get true with the Lord. Thank you. It was a great show, and some great guests. It was lovely listening to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so very much for joining us, a very stable dog. It was a pleasure having you. And all right, once again, everybody feel free to join us at our after show afterwards, but we're moving right down the line. Natalie, we have been Skeptic and Ranting on Do Archaeologists Think in Absence of Evidence is Not Evidence of Absence? I hope you had a good time. And what are your final thoughts?
Oh, I believe that this is going to be a good show, and I'm sorry I kind of came on and hijacked it for a little bit.
Not
but
at all.
I was told to be here by Pat, so you can blame him.
Love you, Nat.
But I guess final thoughts would be that if it's not there, that doesn't mean it's not there. Simple. If you don't see
We
it
just
at
haven't
first, it
found
doesn't
it
mean
yet.
it's, yeah, we just haven't found it yet, and that's okay.
Amen.
But yeah, I'm gonna walk out. I'll see y'all on Discord, and hope you have a good night.
Woo-hoo. Thank you so very much, Natalie, for joining us. And all right, we're moving right down the list. We're sending hearts to everyone, but we are moving to the co-pilot, James.
Oh, no.
We have been Skeptic and Ranting on Do Archaeologists Think in Absence of Evidence is Not Evidence of of evidence.
Yeah.
I hope you had a good time.
Thank you,
as we
Amy.
always do. I think we both did. And yeah, hand in the keys.
Great time. Great time, great discussion, lots of cool information. Thanks everybody for the questions. I think we had some good questions come in, and to our panel of experts. Just thanks so much, guys, and let's do it again sometime.
Woo-hoo. Thank you so very much, James, and I couldn't agree more. We're gonna have to need an encore. And woohoo! All right, we're heading down
trilogy.
To the trilogy. That's right. We gotta get. I was gonna say J.R.R. Martin, but that's actually he wrote more than a trilogy. I'm thinking of Tolkien. need to get my nerdology correct. But we are heading to our
working on
three
it.
special guests of the night. I want to thank them, of course, as many times as possible. But Rob, we have been skeptic and ranting. We have been asking ourselves, do archaeologists thinking absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? I can't thank you enough for being here. Where could people find you if you have anything to share? And what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me on here and for putting this together, and to everybody for coming out and listening. And yeah, I have a blog about archaeology, about archaeological sites, romantheempire.com, spelled differently, ROAMIN for Roman, and same with Twitter. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Woohoo! Thank you so very much, Rob. And if you want, actually, even though Pat probably did, but send me that link and I will make sure that it arrives in chat so people can find it.
We'll put it in the description too.
Woohoo! Put it in the description too. And thank you. We got it right
It's not
there.
like surroundings. You got a lot of Estini sites in Norfolk, where I live in Great Britain. He could dig up there.
Thank you.
He could dig for days. And so go check out that website right down there. I want to send Rob one more thank you. And all right, we're going right down the line. Jonathan, you are on deck.
Thanks,
as
Jonathan.
we have been skeptic and ranting on Do Archaeologists Thinking Absence of Evidence is Not Evidence of Absence. Like I said, I could not thank you more. I think our viewers really appreciated it. Where can anyone find you or anything to share? And then what are your final thoughts?
So, yes, I want to reiterate what Rob said. I want to thank both of the hosts for having us tonight, as well as the people who participated in the discussions and the questions. It was a very interesting topic tonight, and I enjoyed being able to participate in this event. So this is going to be a very unsatisfying answer for most people. I have no social media presence whatsoever, so it's going to be very difficult to find me, and that is intentional. I guess you could find me through my university webpage as far as my academic work is concerned. But before I leave you all, I would just like to say that for those of you in the audience who may not have any experience with archaeology but may be interested to gain a little bit, there's plenty of opportunities both locally and internationally to get involved in a variety of projects so that you can experience either your own local history and archaeology or history and archaeology that may be of particular interest to you. So if that's something that you're interested in, there's plenty of opportunities around for people to do so, and I would encourage you to look into that. So thanks again to everyone. This has been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Was, like I said, an honor to have you guys on. Thank you so very much, Jonathan, for being on the stream tonight.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
And once again, because he did not say you couldn't find him anywhere else, that means he's officially an Amy Newman exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here tonight. And all right, we are moving
University
right down
Newman.
the line. Yes, right. The
Look at this
with the
crap.
mission tonight. Nick is sending, was James an expert on Newman's prom induction, folks? If you don't know where it is, hit him up on Discord. That's right, Newman's prom induction.
Thank you for that, Nick. Appreciate you.
And Pat, we have been having a fantastic skeptic and ranting as we took an archaeological look at Do Archaeologists Thinking Absence of Evidence is Not Evidence of Absence. I couldn't thank you more for getting this topic together because it was truly fascinating and bringing it all to our viewers and just sending love to you in general. As always, where can people find you and what are your final thoughts?
my final thoughts are, first, thank you and James for hosting this. I'm a big fan of the show. As far as my colleagues and my friends, Rob and JQ, I just want to let everybody know, some of you have said, Pat, it's great having you around and we appreciate being able to ask you questions. When I have questions about archaeology, I go to these guys. And I'm going to be very honest. I became an archaeologist after meeting Rob and JQ. I was a historian. I worked with these guys my first year, my first excavation time, my first dig, and it was JQ and Rob who got me more interested in the field, and that's the reason I pursued a second master's degree, and now am going further than that to a terminal degree, is because of these two guys. So these guys are stars, and I look up to them, and I'm glad they came on. You can find me on YouTube at Discovering Ancient History at Pat Lowinger, with Pat Lowinger. It's my own little YouTube, just talking about archaeology and sites I've toured and surveyed. But I do want to say one more thing before we go. As far as Rob and JQ are concerned, we need to have them back. So maybe sometime they can find a topic they want to talk about and talk about it. And I would appreciate that. I am launching a show next month with Biddy Buddha. It's going to call That's That. Look for it. It's going to be awesome. And it's That's That. And the second that, THAT, is talking history, archaeology, and theology. And those of you that know Biddy know that she's an awesome spokesperson. And I hope to be able to help her with some of the historical and archaeological stuff. It should be a good show. It'll be discussions and questions and a little more formatted than maybe some other shows, but we're going to take questions from the audience and try to do a good detailed job on a lot of things. The other thing I want to bring up, and I don't know if she'll be mad at me for doing it, but I'm going to do it. For those of you that saw Nat on tonight, she recently had some health concerns. For those that don't know it, she's required to wear a pacemaker, and she just recently had that replaced, and there were some complications that arose. And she's not going to ask you for help, but some of us that know her have encouraged her to do so. If you're aware of her situation and realize the financial hardship this is placed upon her, she does have a Venmo where she's taking people that are inclined. Any donation would be great. It's Natty Nat. It's NATTIEGNAT on Venmo. Nat's a wonderful person, but because of the complications, she hasn't worked in several months, and she has increasing medical bills. And if anybody is so inclined to help her out, please do so. And that's all I'm going to say before I go. And in February and March, buy my book.
Woohoo! And because you said it, I'm going one step further. And we are just going to put that up on the screen because the skeptic, non-believer, just pro-science community supports each other. So hell yeah, and thank you so much, Pat, for being a mensch.
And that book is about the Christian exaltation of women in the first century?
No, so the title is Betrayed, the Orthodox Subjugation of Women in the Early Christian Church. It'll be available through Winged Hussar. Yeah, Subjugation. It'll be available through Winged Hussar Publishing, distributed by Simon & Schuster. So I'll get you more details when I actually have dates and stuff.
Can't wait.
And Jonathan hasn't read it yet, so he has to read it before it actually gets released.
And all right, I look like someone's telling me if the Discord link works. If not, I will make sure another one is in there. But we are heading to Discord afterwards. I am sending hearts to our entire panel tonight, as we hope you had a fantastic night on this episode of Skeptic and Ranting. To archaeologists thinking absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, where tonight we ask the question if a lack of evidence is not evidence of something lacking. And we had 3, but once again, bonus pack 4. We had archaeologists everywhere with us tonight to find us.
You
I
get an
want to thank
archaeologist. You get an archaeologist. You get an archaeologist.
Expert. Let's say expert. That's probably the best
exactly. We had an expert panel. I want to thank my co-host James W. along with our special guest hosts Robert, Jonathan, and Pat, along with our guests Natalie, a very stable dog, Wild Heart, I said it wrong. Courageous, haha, Oz, and Wesley. Almost do have dyslexia, along with the people in chat, our awesome mods who make this stream so great, and lovely viewers like you who make this channel even possible. If you enjoyed the show, please like, follow, or subscribe, and then hit that bell icon to all so you can join our live streams. After the show, we will be heading over to the Skeptic and Ranting Discord server, the link of which is in the description below. So come join us for more fun, or hey, leave a comment once the video's done. Lastly, if you'd like to help us make even more content, we offer some unique perks for our supporters by checking out our Patreon at patreon.com/Amy Newman. I am Amy Newman, and we will see you all on the next episode of Skeptic Ball Z. Good night, everyone.